Commission meeting tonight. We'd like to start with a Pledge of Allegiance. If you'd all please rise and join me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. We had asked Commissioner Wright to share a thought or prayer with us tonight. If she comes, we'll still let her share her thought, but I'll go ahead and open with a word of prayer. Our Heavenly Father, we bow our heads before Thee tonight, and we give thanks for the opportunity we have of being here to participate in this civic function. We're grateful for the beautiful city in which we live and for the wonderful circumstances that we have in our lives to be here where we can raise our families and enjoy one another's company as neighbors. We pray that Thy blessings will be with us tonight as we consider needful things that have been scheduled for our deliberation, and that we may be led and wisely counseled in the things that we should say and do. And we say these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen. Amen. And Becky, Commissioner Wright, sorry we started without you, but if you'd like to give us a thought tonight, we would love to.
I apologize for being late. My clock says 7:01 and I walked in at 7 o'clock in my defense. I really think that clock is quite early and I tend to come right on time, so I apologize but I'm fine with just doing it another time if that's okay. That'd be great.
Thank you. The first matter of business tonight is a public hearing on a zone text amendment. Just for informational purposes, typically we have discussed minutes of our meetings at the beginning, minutes from the last meeting, but we've elected to move those to the end so that all of you who come to participate in this public forum don't necessarily need to listen to us make amendments to to old news, so to speak. So the first matter tonight is a public hearing consideration of a zone text amendment to CZC 12.12 definitions and CZC 12.36 table of uses to allow catering limited to the table of uses in the commercial medium zones. Or zones. Yeah, I guess it would be zones. Turn the time over to staff.
Okay. Thank you, Chair and Commission. So our applicant is a company called Cup Bop, and they're a Korean fast food company that started off in food trucks and has since moved on to brick and mortar restaurants and now cater to businesses around the state, including arenas and universities, and are expanding into Davis County and would like an industrial kitchen here in Centerville so they can further cater to Weber State and some other facilities here in Davis County. But currently we don't have any use or definition of a catering facility in our city. The closest definition we have are restaurants, but that's not really what they would like to do here. They do not want to serve food here in the city. They just need an industrial kitchen to prepare food to bring off-site to these events and facilities. So we didn't really have anything that would fit that in our table of uses. So we need to create a definition. And looking through the federal definitions for caterers, the broad definition includes one-time events, like weddings and receptions and that kind of thing. And then as a sub-definition, there's also food service contractors, which are more long-term contractual food services that companies would provide to things like schools or arenas and stadiums and stuff like that. And so I kind of included and mixed those definitions together to create this catering limited definition in our table of uses. And then it states that there would be just a limited number of catering transport vehicles. And we didn't want to put a number in that definition because we realized that based on the size and the capacity of the business, you know, that number would change, but we didn't want a whole fleet of trucks or vans in this location. So that is what the limited would stand for, and it does not include things like food trucks or carts or any type of mobile food vehicle where food is served outside, off the vehicle. So looking through the commercial medium zone, CUPOB has identified a location off Main Street. That's Main Street and about 200 South next to the Unity Salon. That was previously a water store, I think, and that would serve their kitchen use quite well. And so this lies in the commercial medium zone, which, as we've established before, is only in the Main Street overlay. And as we've discussed in previous commissions, that we would kind of like to start looking at, you know, renovating and maybe changing, amending this Main Street overlay, as it's in need of some amendments. But going through the general plan and the purposes of the Main Street commercial area and the corridor and commercial zones in general, it seemed to fit the general plan guidelines of what uses should be in commercial zones. It states pretty clearly that in the Main Street corridor that restoration and revitalization is encouraged in this area. Right now, if you look at the table of uses in commercial medium zones that are along Main Street, the use is pretty, the permitted use list is pretty small. That's why there's so many dentists and medical offices on Main Street, but not a lot else. Currently, restaurants and fast food restaurants are not allowed on Main Street, so places like Cutler's Sandwiches and the pizza place are actually non-conforming uses and would not be allowed there right now. And so as we look at the Main Street plan in general, and which includes all of the commercial medium zones in our city, I think it would be wise to start expanding these uses to encourage more businesses to come into the area. And I think that a catering use is a fine, acceptable use for this area. The only issue here would be the vans and the trucks, obviously. I know that restaurants weren't permitted on Main Street because of the concerns about traffic, but I think that a catering facility would actually have less traffic than a restaurant because there's not customers constantly coming and going. It would just be the vans and the employees that would leave a few times a day. So I think in terms of traffic concern, it's actually less than what a restaurant would be. But that being said, that there are going to be large vans and trucks that should be considered for the site in terms of circulation and loading and parking and stuff like that. So I think that a conditional use permit should be required for a use like this, just so we can consider those things in regards to trucks and vans. But other than that, we didn't see too many concerns. Obviously, I think if we were to look at the use of catering limited throughout the city, I think it could be a permitted use in other zones other than commercial, and certainly industrial and commercial, other higher intensity commercial zones would also be a good use or a good place for this use. So if we have, room in further agendas, if this is a use that you'd like to see in other zones, we could go through the zoning code and allow it in other zones. But the applicant just asked for it in CM, so I just addressed that concern for right now. But I could certainly see it allowing it in other zones throughout the city. So do you have any questions?
Thank you, Cassie. Questions for staff? I'm having a hard time envisioning where this is located. I thought that the, or where they're interested in the site, I should say. I guess they haven't necessarily identified the site per se on this application, but around 200 North and Main, it's on the east side of Main Street. Is that right?
I think it's that, that building, Dave, where they had the Chinese place.
The old 7-Eleven.
Yeah, and they've got, isn't there there's a beauty salon there now?
Yeah, it was remodeled from the Jade Hill restaurant After it was Domino, well, 7-Eleven, then later for a long time was Domino's,
Okay.
then became
So
J.D.
it's just-
Hill.
Okay, it's just south of
Yeah,
Donsville.
and then the building was tenant finished into 2 suites. One contains a salon, and the other was the water filtration company.
Okay, so there are 2 suites in that one building. I
Yes.
just thought it was one.
Yeah, and then the water filtration has been gone for, I think, 9-10 months.
This
Okay.
place.
Okay. So it's a vacant suite that's there.
There's a vacant
Yeah.
suite on the south end of the building.
My other question was, one of the things on our agenda tonight, one of the things we've been looking at for the last few meetings, and specifically in our work meeting, is what do we do with the overlay zone? And, I mean, it is still in effect. So this is obviously would be a departure from that. Well, not necessarily, I guess, because it's just a use issue that we're looking at right now. But what if anything in this application would necessarily tie our hands to future consideration of changes to the overlay zone, either taking it out completely or modifying it?
Yeah, I think the largest impact related to the overlay today and the discussions that are shortly going to entail with whether we should change that, it's back to what do you envision the corridor to be? And certainly that discussion outside of the current Main Street plan, which is more of a walkable pedestrian style Main Street. I know that it gets represented as bountiful. I don't think it's necessarily bountiful, the current overlay, but it has a lot of those elements of Bountiful's Main Street where people would walk, they would shop, they would obtain services. And in doing so, the current overlay requires a significant amount of changes when you change the occupancy type as well as you want to expand the building. At this point in time, it's similar to what you were discussing when you went through the Shoup Electric. Whatever user comes along is going to be subject to those terms, changes, and conditions. And some of those are fairly restrictive currently. And so that's been the debate with the Shoup Electric in the past. Right now, you're in kind of the same place. We're currently looking at the use list to that whole corridor, because the only CM corridor we have is along Main Street. But the other provisions about occupancy, expansion of buildings remain in place. It is a tenant finish, so they're not planning to add to the building, so that would then go back to the building code. And does this change the occupancy level of it? And early indications is no, it's still B occupancy. And so anything that qualifies as a B occupancy would be there. Restaurants is a B occupancy. Offices are a B occupancy. The fire station is actually still a B occupancy because it doesn't differentiate the apparatus bay from the offices. And so they would just simply be constrained by any expansions or changes to the site at this point. But it still goes back to, is this a use that you envision on Main Street, either in the overlay or any potential changes? And I think that question's still valid.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought we were looking at 2 things. One would be the, substantial remodel, but also the change of use would trigger the guidelines.
It's a change of occupancy type use.
Okay.
So,
Occupancy type use.
yeah.
Because I was going to say, by definition, if we change the zone text on this and create a new category, we're kind of changing the use.
Yeah, you're changing uses, but there's a lot of uses that stayed as in the same category of the building permit. A B occupancy has a number of type of uses. Restaurant is one of them. Office is a B occupancy. So there's a number of B occupancy, and it's the change of that occupancy status under the building code that triggers. And that's where, for an example, is we discussed whether a church would be a useful use on Main Street for the fire station. Well, that's an assembly use. So an assembly use is a completely different category. So they may be able to use the fire station, but now it's an assembly use, and it comes under different parameters of construction, exits, and so forth that are different than even a restaurant. So early suspicion is this is still the same same occupancy type.
Thank you, Corey. Other questions for staff?
I just want a little clarification. Just even by your definition of changing this to catering, it's industrial. And it kind of, in my mind, is coming across as industrial and better located in an industrial versus on Main Street.
Well, I think you could look at it because you're hearing the word in a generic form of industrial kitchen. Industrial kitchens are in your restaurants. So they have to have the 3 wash bay sink, they have the venting, they have to have the fire suppression. And so your restaurant has an industrial kitchen in it. So all your restaurants have that. Even your Cutler sandwiches has to have a wash and industrial kitchen set up under the health code.
Right.
So
the language was there, but I'm just saying it's just the basic commercial use of this is for delivery and
right, and
so
I think it comes back to the question, you want the use. And, from our standpoint, a restaurant is a more intensive use from the traffic standpoint than this. So that's one argument from our side that would say this is compatible. The issue of catering, all your restaurants do some type of catering. But they do the food sales service, and then the accessory use is the catering. Now you have somebody that wants to do just the accessory use of a restaurant, but it doesn't fall under any categories of primary use. So the question that you have is the intensity level of a caterer. When does it achieve something that you think is more than accessory? In this case it is, because they're asking for a primary. And then the issue is this the right zone and location for that type of primary use? And your comments are what to be debated.
Yeah, I don't think you're not wrong. I think it also should be a permitted use in industrial zones, but I also don't think that disqualifies it as a acceptable use in a commercial medium zone either. So I think it could work either way, depending on the size.
It just seems like we're putting an industrial use on Main Street to me.
Value do you judge?
Thank you. Other questions for staff? Thank you. If the applicant is here, invite the applicant to come forward at this time and make any comments to the staff report or to the comments that you've heard tonight from the commissioners. Please introduce yourself at the mic and for the record, please.
My name is Nate Hatch. Thanks for having me and considering this. A couple things. Thank you, Cassie. I think you did a great job on the report. I think it really spells out what we're doing. I have a couple things just to touch on here, but Kathy, I wanted to address the industrial use and give you an idea of why that particular site is attractive. The history of that building is it was a 7-Eleven. So and then after that it was a couple of different restaurants. And so when I walked into that space, there's a space for washing dishes, and it already had a sink in there, and it has the floor sinks, and it has the plastic on the walls, and it has a place for me to store some stuff. And so it's just perfect for what I'm doing. The other piece I want to just make sure that I clarify so that we're all on the same page here is there's a big difference between what catering limited is in terms of its use and what a restaurant is. I've been in the restaurant business for a long time, and I have some other big restaurants. One big, huge difference is exterior ventilation. So in a traditional restaurant, like you have a Pizza Perfect or you have a Cutler's or whatever, what you have is exterior ventilation units on top of the building. They're big silver round pieces of equipment. Pizza Perfect, if you drive by there, you can see 3 big units. Well, what happens is those pizza ovens create so much heat that they can't ventilate that inside to be safe. So they ventilate it through the roof, and that causes a smell and so forth. And I think that's what we want to stay away from on Main Street. What we do has nothing to do with ventilation. We're talking about rice bowls. And so the equipment that was once on this 7-Eleven, these rooftop units, they don't exist. They've been ripped out. And we don't use any piece of equipment that emits any smell, causes any odor outside of that building. And so there's a little bit of a difference. So anyways, Kathy, that's why this is so attractive instead of an industrial zone. We could go to an industrial zone, but man, this thing was already set up. It's been used as a kitchen for a long time. And we'll have little impact. At 10 a.m. in the morning, the truck or trucks take off and they come back at night. So there's not a lot of coming and going. We've got 2 employees that would be there at any given time. So very little coming and going from employees. There's plenty of parking spaces. There's 2 access points. So getting those vehicles in and out is no big deal. These are like UPS trucks. You see UPS and FedEx trucks all day long down this road, going in and out of places. I have 1 supplier who comes twice a week. The other ones come once a month. So it's really a pretty light impact. So I just want to make sure you kind of understand the difference between, hey, what's a restaurant? What's this catering limited? This catering limited is limited in terms of its use inside and in terms of how many trucks we have. And we want to do what's best for Centerville City in terms of the number of trucks. We just want to make it work.
So the trucks coming in and leaving each day, and do they stay there on site overnight?
They do stay there on site overnight. The health department requires that there be some place where the trucks can be cleaned. And one of their requirements is that it's got to have a home every night. That particular site is great, however, because on both the north and the south side of that building, there's 18 feet by 25 feet at least on both sides. One is fenced, the other side isn't, but they're huge. It's great for loading and unloading, and a catering vehicle could be there and not be in anybody's way. Easy to unload and load. So I think with the limited designation and also with the conditional use permit, if somebody else were to come and propose something similar, you'd have to ask yourself, okay, how are they going to load and unload? How are they going to access and exit? And this particular site is really smooth for those kind of things. So, good question.
Other questions for the applicant?
How many trucks do you currently have?
I have 2 mobile kitchens, a truck and a trailer. I also have a van, but it can just be a normal parking spot. The trucks and the trailers as well, I mean, those are 8 feet wide. A standard parking stall is 9 feet. I mean, it can still fit in a normal parking spot, but this particular site has a lot of parking spots, and it has those additional areas that I talked about.
So where do you currently prepare the food? Is it in the truck and the trailer?
So
currently?
I have a big kitchen in Salt Lake.
Okay.
And for the last 2 years, well, a year and a half, we've been driving from that kitchen up to Davis and Weber County.
Okay.
Well, you know, transportation costs, wear and tear on the truck, and I'm paying those employees just to sit all the way there and all the way back. And so we would just like something a little bit closer. If you picture this space, a lot of it's office use. You know, there's an office area, there's a storage area, there's a 3-compartment sink for washing dishes, and there's a restroom. So,
Are you planning to expand the number of trucks you have?
just like it doesn't make sense for us to keep expanding in Salt Lake, it wouldn't make sense that we expand here. And I think we can limit the number of trucks and stick to that. Because no, if we wanted to go further, we would get another commissary or another catering limited site somewhere else. So,
Okay. Thank you.
yeah, for sure.
Other questions for the applicant? Thank you, Nate.
Yeah.
This matter's been scheduled for a public hearing. We'd invite anyone of you to come forward at this time if you'd like to speak on this matter. Seeing no one coming forward, I'll close the public hearing. Turn the matter back over to the commission for further discussion.
I personally agree with Kathy that this use, I'm not so much, I mean, we've talked a lot about the impact of this use, and I'm not so much concerned about the impact of the use, but the appropriateness of the use in this area. Seeing the fact that we've been talking specifically with the city council, that we've been talking as a commission about the future of Main Street, I feel like adding this use right now is a little premature to the discussion that we've been having with the city council. I also am a little bit hesitant about this being an accessory use, as you were kind of talking about with restaurants, you know, they cater, but it's an accessory use that would be the primary use for this area. And again, it's not necessarily the use impact that I'm concerned about, because like was mentioned, only having a couple trucks and, you know, it seems like it's not going to be much impact. But I do wonder if it is the right direction for what we want to have happen on Main Street. Now, and if restaurants are what we want to have on Main Street, which may very well be what we decide to do once we talk with the city council, you know, I read this, and at first when I heard it was Cup Pop, I'm like, yes, I would love a Cup Pop in Centerville. And I was like, oh wait, no, we can't even get the food. Like that was like a very unwelcome surprise for me. I was like, no, I did not like this. So I was actually really excited about it. But then when I heard the use of it, again, it's not that it's going to be a negative impact, but it's just the use that I'm not sure fits in the commercial medium for me. I agree that I think in an industrial area or in an area that we're not looking to revitalize and looking to make plans for would be a more appropriate area, or this may be the area that it's appropriate for, but I feel like it's premature.
Thank you. Other comments?
For what it's worth, I don't have the same concerns that you both have shared. I mean, it is a commercial area. Commercial by definition is looking for some type of a commercial use, and you recognize that you're not particularly concerned that there are going to be impacts in this area. I mean, it sounds to me like this is something that if we are concerned, for instance, the applicant has mentioned that there is no ventilation now. Of course, that doesn't mean that if we allow this type of a conditional use that somebody else couldn't take that facility and add ventilation. And I think that we could control that through a conditional use permit. But the use itself, I'm not as concerned that it doesn't fit this area.
Along those lines,
Particularly given, you know, the Pizza Perfect across the street and the Cutlers up
But
the
those
road,
are
which I
both
recognize.
non-conforming.
I recognize that they're both non-conforming.
But would we miss them if they left?
Right, and that's what I'm saying. I'm not saying that I'm against restaurants along Main Street, because I go to Cutler's myself, and we have gone to Pizza Perfect, and I appreciate, and I actually think that if we were to discuss the future of Main Street, it may very well look more at restaurants and some of those, but this to me feels like receiving all of the accessory use without any of the benefit of actually having a restaurant. That accessory use impact, which is minimal as far as coming and going, but still changes that feeling of that area without the benefit of having the actual restaurant.
Just to mind you though, we have uses out there that are in home occupations. We have a bakery operating in a basement, and they would love to have a place as they are getting more and more successful to move to. And if you look at Main Street and revitalization, something like a tenant finish with the pizza, or no, the 7-Eleven is a good spot for a bakery to go. I'm not saying we're going to go there and allow a bakery, but it would be a great local business to do. If you look at the wedding catering and the opportunities for that to service the community, that's what we look at if we can mitigate the impacts. So, you know, when you look at the number of uses that are permitted on Main Street, it's so low that there's a reason why we're having some struggles. And some of the uses that the people enjoy already are not even allowed. So we do believe that we have a topsy-turvy kind of use list in the CM zone. And when we have home occupations that cook and do what they need to do inside their homes and then take it out into a delivery truck, we look at that use and something like this use. That's a good transit place for somebody working out of the home occupation to go onto Main Street and still serve the local community. Now, granted, this one is going to events at Weber State and so forth, but I don't think we're trying to narrow the uses by who they cater to. We're just providing opportunities for that limited catering to take place.
Well, and for what it's worth, I can imagine a number of different businesses that would be able to provide services not to the people that are located in the area that I would suspect we would have less heartburn about, right? So if you had an artist who made some type of, significant artwork that was going to need to have trucks that came in twice a week to haul out the artwork that they wouldn't be selling to the local community but would still be able to use that space. I don't know that we would be having the same discussion to say, oh, well, that little artist shop really should be in the industrial zone. So for me, I look at it and say the impact issue is an important part of the discussion. I don't know so much that it should be driven by, we think that catering per se doesn't fit this idea that we have of Main Street, because you could also put in some type of a call center there, right, that wouldn't be servicing the local community and that wouldn't be creating impacts. I am just not as concerned by the nature of the use. I think that it would fit this area, particularly given the limited nature of the operations that the applicant has described.
Yeah, I find it to be a considerable benefit to have a sustainable and valuable tenant in a building that struggled for a lot of years. I think that is worthy of consideration. A question I had for staff was, if we consider this catering use and potentially a more intense user that could come in, maybe a pizza catering business or someone that would require larger fans, for example, and through the conditional use permit, we attempted to mitigate that. With that exact example, I was wondering if staff is familiar with any ways that you could mitigate the negative smell of a large fan.
First go back to what Lisa constantly trains everybody about is, once it's conditional, you're really accepting the use there.
Right.
So unless you come up with substantial impacts that cannot be handled, it's very difficult to say no to a CUP to begin with. So I think that's a cautionary place to decide when you apply uses. But example for the 7-Eleven, Carol Fernelius lived behind before she moved. And where was the ventilation fan on the Domino's Pizza? The back wall.
Shooting out the back.
Shooting out the back wall. I don't think you totally eliminate the smells, but you do put in that you can regulate where the ventilation system is put. You can require the parapet, you can, so that the ventilation goes up into the air and minimizes how much it's going to affect and how quickly it disperses. But certainly you couldn't prevent a smell. And so, the issue is you can mitigate some things, but that doesn't mean that it's 100% undetected. So you have to keep in mind that.
Yeah, thank you. Other comments? Thank you for your participation. Chair will entertain a motion.
I would make a motion for the Planning Commission to recommend approval of the stated definition of catering limited and the allowed use of a conditional use permit in commercial medium zones with the following directives. 1, in the staff report, and reasons for actions A through F.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Further debate? Hearing none, we'll take a roll call vote. Commissioner Johnson?
Aye.
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 Nay.
Nay.
Aye.
Motion passes. In the staff report, we have a recommendation for a proposed motion 2, which was alluded to in Cassie's introduction, which deals with taking a look at possibly expanding this use into other zones as well, commercial high and industrial specifically. and directing staff to further examine those zones as possible acceptable zones. Any discussion on that matter?
I would be interested in the analysis that staff could come up with on that.
Would you like to make a motion to that effect?
Yes, I would. I hereby make a motion for the Planning Commission to recommend that staff further examine the acceptable zones for this use and review amending the zoning code accordingly with reasons A through B as in the staff report for the action.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any debate? Not. Commissioner Hayman?
Aye.
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 Passes unanimously. Thank you. Item number 2 on our agenda tonight has also been scheduled for a public hearing. This is consideration of the proposed conceptual subdivision plat for Moss Acres located at 2026 North Main, a 4-lot single-family subdivision within the hillside overlay. Staff?
Okay, thank you again. A few weeks, months ago now, there was a rezone on this property from agricultural low to residential low. It is at 2026 North Main, and there's currently a home on the site. It is a historical significant site built in 1896. And now Mr. Chad Morris has a conceptual subdivision plan for us at this site that would include 4 lots. And it is also located in the hillside overlay. So according to his current site plan, he is planning on keeping the existing home on the lot and the existing garage, but subdividing them between 2 parcels with a total of 4 on the lot. There are a few issues with this, obviously being in the hillside overlay, that from a normal residential low subdivision standpoint, he's in the right place and things look good, but the hillside overlay does have some extra standards to consider in these subdivisions, so he doesn't quite fit the requirements for those due to these extra standards that were in the hillside overlay zone. It states that for single-family lots, the minimum lot size and yard requirements of the underlying zone shall apply except lots in slope areas between 10 and 20%. The lot shall be 1.5 times the minimum requirement. The average slope for this entire parcel is 11.5, and each individual lot ranges anywhere from 10% slope to 14. And so based on this requirement, it says that it should be 1.5 times, but we don't have a minimum standard for our lots anymore. So Corey and I just kind of disregarded that.
And just to share that disregard, like we ignore it. We went off the language, minimum lot size, and we do not have a minimum lot size. So the issue is how do you apply that? And ultimately, when Cassie came and we discussed this matter, I acknowledge that we do not have a minimum lot size. So the issue of trying to go back in and say, how do we take 4 units an acre and 1.5 times it seemed a little bit ambiguous. And my position is under our state law, the Land Use Management Act now says that if there's something unclear or if there's something you're debating and discussing, you're required to interpret it in favor of the property owner. And so at this point in time, we took the position that we no longer establish a minimum, so therefore that application no longer applies. And it does show, again, the hillside overlay does need to be updated at some point in time.
So that little bit was just not applicable. I won't say disregarded, but
It was disregarded.
we don't like to do that a lot. But and then the second requirement is that all lots in slope areas more than 10% must be platted at a minimum of 100 feet wide at the setback line. And this is where there's a little bit of problems because while the lots are wide enough for a normal residential subdivision. They are not, according to this standard, at the they're not 100 feet wide at the setback line. They range anywhere from 60 to 110, and so the lot is just not big enough to handle the number of lots that the applicant would like with this width requirement. So there are some issues. Also, because of the existing historical home on the site and the garage, the lot lines are not exactly perpendicular and straight as we normally like them, just normal square blocks. This one, lot 4, as you can see, does jut out a little bit, and 3 just takes on a little bit of an irregular shape. The Planning Commission is allowed to let that go if they find that there's a good reason to, and based on the fact that he's just accommodating the setbacks for this home that he wants to maintain on the site, we thought that was a good reason to have just a little bit of variance in those lot sizes and shapes. And so it is just at the conceptual stage right now. There's obviously a lot more to be done at the preliminary and subdivision in terms of the hillside overlay. They do need SWIP plans and soils reports and a lot of engineering in terms of drainage and utilities and stuff like that. But just at the conceptual plan, we just wanted to bring up these issues for now to the commission to see if there were any major things.
Thank you, Cassie. Just for clarification, the lots that do not have the minimum width, lot 4 being one, right? Lot 4 is where the existing home is. Mm-hmm. But their access is not off the public street. It looks to me like it's off a private lane. Is that right?
They're going to reconfigure those, and so I think the developer can answer some of those questions. I don't think all of them are sharing common access. I think the house off of Main Street, they had some discussion about whether there would be some sharing of the driveway, but if my understanding, the rest of them were going to be independently accessed.
Okay. I guess I'm not sure where the garage is in the existing building, but it looks like it comes off of that shared access.
Yeah, the home here, if you can see the cursor, has this attached garage, but this garage now will be on another lot.
Okay,
and so we have to address the issue of you can't have an accessory without a primary.
So there's not an attached garage on the old house?
No, and then my understanding is the other smaller buildings are going to be demolished as part of the subdivision process.
Okay, thanks. Other questions for staff? If the applicant is here, we'd like to invite him forward at this time and to respond to the staff report and any other questions that may have been raised. It's nice to have you back.
Hey, thank you. Chad Morris. Yes, in terms of driveway access for that house, the current thought is to just keep that Main Street cut and reroute the driveway so it's on the south side of those trees. But there is a possibility that we could do some sort of shared driveway access with either going out to Main Street or out to 4th or 2050 East. But we don't necessarily need to do a shared access. It has the cut, the access on Main Street, which is already there, so we don't need approval for that from UDOT. And so everything's good on that end.
So just a quick question, then the road coming down from 2050,
Right there, yeah.
yeah, does that primarily service lot 3 then?
Yes, so that would service lot 3. I'm trying to remember which lot. So 1, 2.
Lot 2 in the center.
Is it 2 in the center?
Two's in the
2.
center.
That's lot 2. So that would service lot 2.
And lot 3's to the east,
Correct.
and it would have frontage on the road there.
Yep. And that has 80 feet of frontage there, if I remember. Is that right, Corey? 80 feet.
Yeah.
80 feet of frontage there. All of the building pads there, and this was kind of an interesting discussion I had with the city staff, in terms of the city doesn't want too big of building pads, but they don't want too small, and so, but all the building pads are ample space to allow a nice home there. Depth-wise, I think that the shortest we have is right close to 50 on the depth, and then width-wise, the shortest one we have is lot 3 there, and I think that's close to 65 feet wide. So building size, I've tried to make it so there's really no issues in terms of what house, really anybody, it's kind of up in the air for everybody. There's no specific style of home because each one is very generic and fits a good plan. Even with the reason, and I guess I understand the reason for the hillside zone in terms of having the width at the frontage, which I could do on this, but the plan or the lot lines would not be narrow, would not be perpendicular, parallel. But I could do it. However, and I even brought a map to where I've just drawn out how it would work. If we didn't allow those, the only option would be three lots, and the only option would be to tear down the house. So I would prefer not to tear down the house. I mean, obviously there is some personal bias there in terms of it'd be helpful for me, but also it is a historic home. When I met with city council, they also mentioned, hey, we'd like to see the home stay. So I've tried to do that, and again, I could rearrange the lot lines to make it fit, but it just wouldn't look great, honestly. And I could fit all the different hillside zones. However, and I guess what I was getting to is that with the hillside zones, having it, and I talked to staff about this as well, there's a 10% to a 20% slope that if you're all of a sudden you're 10.1, you have to have 100-foot frontage. Whereas if you're 90 or 9.9, you only have to have 60 feet of frontage. And so I kind of talked to them like, this really doesn't make sense. And honestly, I would like to have it be based on the ratio of how much frontage you have, or how much of a grade of slope you have based on how much frontage you need. But they've kind of suggested, having it this way allows us the ability to kind of, just to look at things
Don't
more
use the word
deeply.
disregard.
No, we're not disregard at all. So, but to look at things and have the ability to discuss and need approval just to have that go through, which I can understand that as well. So, but again, with all our slopes, even the greatest slope is 14. Most of that is lot, I can't remember if it's 2 or 3, and it's just a very small portion of that it's just a steep hill right there. But even that would be perfect for a rambler with a walkout basement. So if I don't know if you've ever gone by that area, but it's nothing scary in terms of slope. I look at it and I think it's would only be added to have homes here and lots like this.
Thanks, Chad.
Yeah.
Questions for the applicant?
Not that I necessarily want to have it redrawn, but could you show us? You said you have it. I just want to see it.
Yeah, part of our discussion, and this is conceptual, so it's opportunity for the city to give the applicant feedback. Part of our discussion with Randy and Kevin in the hillside issues, because we have not had a hillside development since Bruce Pitt subdivision. Ford Canyon was exempted by the city from the hillside, and Chapel Hill was PDO. So there's reasons they did not get into the hillside development on those projects. But Randy and Kevin brought up the point that if we go 100-foot lot, what we begin to have is what you have at Ford Canyon. People now have large lots, and they want to regrade the entire lot and put everything onto one level. So what they do to get around the hillside ordinances is you can have 8-foot retaining walls. So they 8 foot down 4 feet, 8 foot down 4 feet, 8 foot down 4 feet. So we get these massive retaining systems going on, because once you hit that large lot, they want to flatten it out for as much room as they can get. So actually having the 100-foot going too large encourages the opposite of what we're trying to do in the hillside. People are using the retaining systems to flatten their land. But this, likewise, if you go too narrow, the 60-foot on a slope, now everybody's got to retain in order to get the house in the driveway. So, you know, there's some place where whatever that happy medium is, we don't know. So we've encouraged Chad to look at opportunities for changing the code, which is the ratio that he talked about. Different slopes have different ratios of widths. We've also talked about that none of the surrounding land developed under the hillside. So does he qualify under the variance provisions outside the economic argument? And either way, he either has to go and get something changed and come back with a solution to the 100-foot, or adjust it to what he's going to pass out to you is the 100-foot.
Yeah, and again, these are just my drawings, don't judge me. No, but this, can you see the blue? I'm trying to think where it's situated.
Yeah,
So the blue, this way.
all the way. One more.
That's how it's really.
Like that. Like that.
Okay.
That's how it's laid out.
The blue lines are the lots, is what those would look like. And you can see the house, because of the house, how it's situated to keep the house, it just has to be oddly designed. And even then, this lot is very narrow, very narrow, and it is tough to build on. And so I don't even know if staff would approve of this type of layout because of the angled lot lines, and they're not parallel.
Then it makes the building really hard to find something that would work on that type of lot too.
You go through confusion also with individual owners as to where's my lot line, where's my, now you have issues with, do you want me to bring it over there?
No, you're good.
Okay.
Thanks, Chad.
Other questions for the applicant?
Does the applicant, you were saying, you know, proposing an average based on the grade, would that be something that he would request?
Yeah, I mean, the issue is to amend the code or see if a variance process is a qualifying factor. And we've discussed both and the merits of both. And I think we'll just have to, if changing the code is in play, he'll do that in the interim before he comes back with his preliminary, and you'll see it that way. If a variance process based on the uniqueness of the property and its location qualifies, then you'll get a report back from the Board of Adjustment. If both of those ideas fail, then he'll be back with the 100 feet.
Well, because I actually really like the idea of having the, based on the grade, because that makes a little more sense to me as well. But I also feel a little bit uneasy just to say yes to something if it doesn't fall within the code that we have. So
yeah,
how do we do
you're not
that?
saying yes to something. You're just, it's conceptual level is the opportunity for them to apply and to get feedback. And so, you know, if he came back in and said, I want 7 lots now from the conceptual 4, I would say that's a significant change. But we've identified a problem, and the preliminary is either a resolution to that or not at preliminary. So we don't feel like you're approving anything at this point. I mean, I know the argument is we call it conceptual acceptance. It's not an approval, and it's more of an approval. But conceptual is like sketch plan, concept plan. All the cities use the early ideas to give you feedback so that you can adjust things at where you spend most of your money for preparing drawings and plats. So we feel like it can move forward unless you feel that this needs to be answered before you can buy off on a conceptual.
Well, one of your conditions, if I'm reading your proposed conditions correctly, is that the preliminary subdivision plat shall also meet the requirements of the hillside overlay preliminary review. So you'd revisit the issue at that point anyway, right?
Correct.
dimensions of the lots would meet the standards as outlined in the Hillside Overlay Development Standards. You'd revisit it at that point as well.
We
And-
do those verifications during that preliminary.
And so, if I understand what you just said, by accepting the conceptual subdivision plat, what we're really doing is saying, yeah, we generally understand that this property can have 4 lots. What we are not willing to say right now is whether it can do so without compliance with the Hillside ordinance.
Right.
And then at that point, once a variance is correct, once a variance is given, then that would,
Yeah, it would satisfy those
then it would
requirements.
satisfy that,
Right,
and I'd be able to move on to the next
That would give us
stage.
the direction we need
Yes.
to
Right.
move on.
Okay.
I do still, I like what was said earlier, that taking a good hard look at the Hillside ordinance with respect to graduation on the slope versus frontage makes a lot of sense.
It does. It's been a long-standing issue of upgrading our hillside overlay, and we've just picked other elements to chase.
Well, and I guess like you say, there's not a lot in that area still left to develop, but this just happens to be one of the
I mean,
easier ones.
from our position, if he could not do 4 lots at all, there's no way to do it, I think it would be a different discussion. But here is,
Yeah.
you either fix it to 4 with 100 feet or figure out another way.
Yeah.
Right.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
This matter's been scheduled for public hearing. Anyone who'd like to come forward and speak on this matter at this time may do so. Seeing no one coming forward, I'll close the public hearing. Further discussion by the commissioners.
I would love to see a gradation change in the hillside. I think when you look at the preliminary, the acreage is 0.2, each one is over 0.2, 0.25, 0.27, 0.29, so nearly a third of an acre in some of these. I feel like it's obvious that 4 lots are capable on this. And I also think that the mean slope, just over 10%, would also, 10.7. I'm not worried about that. I think the reason why that was originally put in place is for those high slopes. Now, I do think that we should respect and follow ordinance, so I am a little concerned that we can address that, but it seems to be addressed in the motion, so.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any other comments, debate? Not Chair will entertain a motion.
I hereby make a motion for the Planning Commission to accept the conceptual subdivision plat at 2026 North Main with directives 1 through 5 in the staff report and suggested reasons for action A through F.
I'll second.
Been moved and seconded. Any further debate? Not, we'll take a roll call vote. Commissioner Johnson?
Aye.
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 Passes unanimously. Thank you, Chad. Okay, the next matter on the agenda is also scheduled for a public hearing. This is the consideration of the proposed zoning map amendment from commercial very high into a planned development overlay along with their conceptual plan at the northwest corner of Parish Lane and 1250 West. Spencer Wright, applicant.
Mr. Chair, just as an apology up front, Commissioner Johnson wanted me to put this at the end of your agenda.
I understand that Commissioner
But-
Johnson may need to take a break
No,
at
yeah.
this time.
But you have other items that needed to be addressed nor at the end of the meeting, and the applicant didn't want to wait all night, so.
I understand. You may be excused.
Thank you.
Thank you. We still have a quorum.
Where's Kevin today, did you say?
Okay, we'll turn the time over to staff.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members of the commission, as you recall, was it sometime in April earlier this year, Legacy Commons was presented to you as a PDO request. This is located across the street from Legacy Trails, which is the project in our southwest corner of 1250 West and Parish Lane. This would be the northwest corner across the street from that project. As you recall, the applicant came before the Planning Commission proposing the preliminary idea conceptually. Because it is, as of late, density is a cause of much discussion in the city. And so during that time, the applicant was concerned about how much effort and drawings and expenditures, if this was something that the city was definitively not interested in. He certainly would then maybe pursue a different direction. Part of that, and they can explain it to you, is that they own a substantial portion of that corner area, but UDOT has some excess land on the west side from the Legacy right-of-way, and that is up for sale. And they would want to incorporate that into the project as a whole because that's adjacent to their development. And to utilize the property wholly for commercial seemed to be a big apple to take a bite out of. And so they wanted to take advantage of the West Centerville Neighborhoods Plan that allows you to use mixed use and add in some residential component to that mixed use. In going to the City Council, the Planning Commission was fairly supportive of the concept, was not ready to weigh in on the design and the details of the project, and at the suggestion of staff, forwarded up the idea that the council should at least consider this. When it arrived at the council level, they became uncomfortable because they felt like they had not been presented to them all of the details. And so before giving too much feedback, they remanded this back to the applicant and the staff and the commission to, if this was to proceed, to further detail the concept. And so here we are. Before you. I've had much discussion with the applicant during this process. It's been rough for both of us to roll up our sleeves and see what we could detail out here. I know that from my perspective, knowing the history of all of the other elements in this neighborhood and the concerns, was trying to answer some of those. If you recall, we early on discussed access to Parish Lane. There's a restriction from Parish Lane owned by UDOT. So all of the accesses would be on 1250 West. There is some early concern that the furthest south access and its distance from the intersection and how does that impact the stacking of traffic in the left-hand turn lanes was an early issue. The applicant has met with UDOT several times. I'm sure they can tell you their war stories in the war room with them. I became a little aggressive and scheduled my own appointment with UDOT and went up there with the definition of this corridor and the application of this corridor and the whole 30,000-foot vision of Parish Lane. And I walked out a little wounded and bloody from that discussion. Ultimately, regardless of what even my position on whether this is a Category 3 roadway under UDOT's, which I disagreed with because I look at majority of Parish Lane and do not believe it meets a Category 3 roadway. That's the idea that all accesses are off internal streets. So when you look up Parish Lane East, where do you have all accesses off of local streets? Not many. So their idea is to attrition all of those accesses for the long future. My position is you're probably not going to be able to attrition those for the long future, so why is this still in a Category 3? Well, cut to the chase. I lost the argument. I lost the argument because they have the card in their hand. They purchased the access right with this property, and they have no intention of selling it. So regardless of all the policies of design, they own something, and he who owns it makes the rules. And so UDOT is, unless there's greater discussions and debate, they will not approve an access on Parish Lane. So that makes it tough. If you're trying to do commercial development and the idea that commercial users want is convenient and quick access for their patrons, now you see the accesses occurring a little shorter distance off of the intersection road, and they can describe to you their market concerns with that. We do have another access lining up with 500 North, so that's a positive thing that's occurring. They have submitted to the city a traffic study. The traffic study does support this configuration. It comes with a use hour configuration of that southern access, so there's restrictions during peak time to not use that. I can tell you our city engineer is a little concerned because how does somebody driving really know the hours of operation and when you can make that turn? So I do think there's merits from a traffic standpoint that would mitigate it. But at the same time, in discussion with Kevin, our city engineer, he believed that further discussions with the traffic engineers, whether it be the city hired one or talking with A-Trans, that they could look at this, whether there would be some limitations in a ride in and ride out, medians. There was discussion of widening some of the lanes so that some of the through traffic can take place. Kevin did indicate in our discussion with the applicant that he believed there was a solution that could be worked out. Whether everybody agrees to that solution, not sure, because once you get down to those kind of details, you're not sure what's going to happen. But at conceptual level, he felt comfortable allowing this to proceed forward, and then as they come in with their final plans, we could detail out those discussions and see if we could reach an agreement on that southern access. So that manages that. The land uses are consisting of a hotel, a restaurant pad, a coffee house pad. I call them commercial because I found that if you expect only one single use, and it may be difficult to get that user, you're going through a lengthy process changing everything. I'm not sure a restaurant. It would be nice. Certainly they would market it, but I'm not sure a restaurant is going to be located there. So to restrict it to a restaurant would be a decision of the city. I don't think it would be wise. I think it would be better to leave it in a more general status of commercial and fill it with the market demand. They have secured a hotel user. They can explain to you where they're at with the hotel. That seems to be a driving factor and shortly. So there seems to be a definitive interest in the hotel. My understanding from the applicant is that they are taking upon themselves the construction of the residential units. They can address that or verify that to you. And so that's the concept of the land uses. I made a note quickly in your report. The plan restricts the number of units to a maximum gross area of 15 units an acre. They're proposing 111. They would be eligible for 132. Not guaranteed 132, but eligible for 132. So they're under that cap. We do have the commercial components, a little less in the predominant acreage in the past. We've allowed that reduction across the street. We allowed the 2 commercial pads in the Maverick to function as the lesser commercial. So this does qualify in a couple parameters of allowing some commercial that could potentially cater to residents in the area. It doesn't guarantee it. Obviously the hotel with visiting and family and friends might work, but I'm not sure that's the driver of services for the residential units. But I do think the hotel is allowed under the CVH, so if the residential went away, the hotel could still come to the site. And I do think the hotel benefits our Class A office space for conferences and trainings and so forth. So I do think the hotel, in spite of it not serving the residents directly necessarily, is a positive in the development. With the issues of design, the applicant can go over with you on the design. We've had fun rolling up our sleeves on that. You know, there's been concern about parking, particularly the mixed use where they're cross-accessing the parking over in the Legacy crossing with the theater. They are not proposing that. These would be sufficient to have 2 plus some visitor parking, 2 parking stalls plus visitor parking independent of the hotel and the commercial uses. So we've talked about that matter. The issue of the layout of the site, if you recall, our Parish Lane design guidelines are primarily focused on Parish Lane, not 1250 West. This plan focuses all of those type of improvements on 1250 West. That's the reason for the PDO too, because from our perspective, trying to force them on Parish Lane to have access to the ramp areas when UDOT has no intention of traffic crossing in the ramp areas. That's the reason across the street you have that rounding of the fence on the trail on the south side. It's to discourage people from heading further south or to cross at 1250 to get onto the trail. Part of that discussion is this would be a great opportunity to take the Parish Lane frontages, still dress it up nice in a design and landscape perspective. And so their proposal is to do some landscaping. Their parking lot lighting would match the decorative style across the street at the Trails project, but it would be the parking lot lighting instead of the pedestrian lighting. They would take all those amenities, put them on 1250 West. They would look at 1250 West. We would do an 8-foot system on 1250 West. We would begin the North Trail segment. So you could reach 1250 West, head south through the trails. You could come here and begin the process of moving the north segment. Why that's important, the west side of the road is where we would put a future trail to the bridge over Legacy. That trail is on the west side. And the nice part about is if we make this an idea that we're beginning a alternative mode of transportation, we have node A, we have node B, we don't have anything between. That's better to get the grants from the Wasatch Front Regional Council when you're connecting existing areas. So I think that's a benefit to the city, is now to establish a north segment to the Legacy Trails, and the community as a whole benefits. The discussion has been to be concrete though instead of the asphalt. Part of that is working with the commercial area, and they felt like the concrete and the formalized landscaping was a little better product to sell in their marketplace. So I talked about maybe we should asphalt it so you can see which direction would go. But I think whether it's asphalt or concrete, it's a good segue to the trail. They would front the units. This was discussion how we would address the residential. These are walk-up type style. They've given you in the original packet a quick picture of it. Today I received an additional picture of a color palette. It was put on the Novus, so hopefully you achieved that. I do have a copy here if you would like to look at it. It's very similar to what you saw in the early picture, except they have now their color palette selection at the bottom of the elevation style. Still the walk-up, I call it modified prairie style. I don't know if that's the proper term, but what I do like about the units, and I know this sounds really selfish because I'm saying what I like, but as a planner in looking at the trail system, the design of the units, I think it introduces another product type. So we have a variety of product types available for people to live in. The synergy, even though there's maybe 100 or plus units here, I think it completes the synergy of this neighborhood. I know that there is some angst in the community about density. My opinion as a planner is that density is usually when it's associated adjacent to residential. This is on the west side. We've had very little complaints and very little opposition through the entire history here of those residential units. The biggest complaint, the residential units, is crossing with the parking matter. That's been the biggest complaint. We wouldn't be repeating that here. So I think it's good. The product style is interesting in the sense of this will front even on their internal streets. So this will have more of a townhome kind of feel on their access lanes and tuck the parking in the center and behind the units. They will provide some garages. I think there's 92 proposed for the 111. The streetscape matches the front yards with the units on 1250 West, similar to the streetscape in the trails across the street. They centered the common amenities so that the internal pathway systems lead to a play area and a clubhouse. The streetscape continues with that product. And so overall, I think this is a good layout. We have some bugs to work through, but in perfecting the plan. But at this point in time, I'll be honest with you, as I discussed with the applicant, I'm still not sure the city council understands the vision of this project. And so rather at this point, trying to nitpick the project to perfection, I think we have enough to make a decision on whether we should forward this PDO. And obviously, from the presentation, staff's supportive.
Thank you, Corey. Questions for staff?
Did you apply the Parish Lane design guidelines on this project?
Yes, in the conditions of approval, we gave 2 variations. That was moving the Parish Lane design guidelines pedestrian elements to the 1250 West. And then the other variation deals with the subdivision. And the hotel and the commercial units are still tied to the Parish Lane Gateway design standards.
So there won't be any pedestrian on Parish Lane?
Correct.
Encouraging.
There's no plans for a pedestrian element on Parish Lane. We will still have the landscaping. They still, I believe, plan on some fencing design to match across the street. Their parking lot lighting, the security lighting will match the decorative style across the street, but you will not have the pedestrian amenities. They'll be replaced to 1250.
So when you're talking about the nodes and to get like grants and everything, you're saying that you're encouraging people to go down 1250 and then go through the actual project to get to...
No, they'll come along the street frontage. So you'll come off the overpass on the north side, and if you want to go south, you cross 1250 West at the intersection with Maverick, hit that trail, and that takes you to the southern connection. If you come down to the end of the bridge in the access way, instead of crossing to the south, you will cross to the west, then you will hit the trail and run up 1250 West all the way to Legacy. So you won't walk internally. Like right now on the south side, you're walking around the front of the units and across the back. This will use 1250 West as a segment. We have an 80-foot right-of-way there. We have a huge area to install a pathway system. And so we can connect 1250 West and Parish with the north segment. So you'd
encourage users to go up 1250 all the way over the overpass and then all the way over down to get onto Legacy.
Well, you go over the 1250 overpass and you're just a short stint and you hit the Legacy Trail.
But then you go down and then you hit it right there.
No, you hit north. You'll just cross right there at the Salmon construction site and just head north. If you want to, you can go down 1275 and hit the DNRG and head north. And if you really wanted to turn around and come south.
You can't hit it because it goes behind and then it comes and it loops
Yeah,
around.
let's go to
like that.
Let's go to the Google.
So there's no actual access from 1250, right?
Yes, there is access from 1250. Supposed to get me out of ground. Now where am I at? That's the question.
There we go.
Okay, so if you come here, Parish Lane. So that's the I-15 interchange. You're coming down Parish Lane on the north side. You'll hit this intersection. You can cross here to Maverick, and you can walk around this project to the Burnham trailhead right here. With their project, you would come down off of Parish, hit this corner, walk the front of their project. Then we'd have to apply for grants to cross 1250. There's your bridge, and your pedestrian access on that bridge is on that west side, and there's your Legacy Trail right there.
That's not an official, it's just a dirt, it's not like a real trail.
No, this is your trail. This is all asphalt.
Yeah.
And you can
but
come.
Right, that little corner is it.
Mm-hmm.
You'd have to come down, like,
And
I'm just saying road biking, let's just say hypothetically.
Road biking, you could just ride,
there.
you could ride this road and come right there. There's your asphalt access right there. If you don't want to use this dirt, your asphalt access is right there.
I didn't know there was access right there,
Yep.
okay.
Right there is access if you want your bike. Or you could come down the road and hit the DNRG.
That's the one, yeah.
And go up. But yeah, there is.
There's no, so the one.
So there's your asphalt access point right here.
Okay. So the one, like the grass and the area that's just west of their clubhouse would be, were you saying that was that's not for public, right? You're
No,
not like,
that's their private development and their internal pathways for their residents to the clubhouse and play area. And that buffers the hotel area to the residential units.
Other questions for staff? If the applicant is here, we'd invite the applicant to come forward at this time and comment on the staff report or any other things that you've heard from the commissioners?
Spencer Wright, thank you for your time this evening. Corey's done an excellent job of giving you all the background and details of this project. As he mentioned, we currently own approximately the eastern 6 acres of the project, and we are under contract to purchase the western 2 acres from UDOT to complete this project. UDOT's property is roughly in an L shape, so they do own a little bit of the frontage there. And so what we'd like to do is to have this PDO applied to this property and then purchase the UDOT property and kind of square it off, move the commercial up onto Parish Lane. And that would mean that we would need a use that could fit there in the back. We've developed a lot of commercial retail in our careers, and we think it'd be very difficult to find some commercial and retail for the northern half of this property. So that would be our proposal, would be to get this retail and commercial up front, and we think the highest and best use for the northern half of the property is multifamily residential. We think this is a good mixed-use project that will benefit the city. We're committed to Centerville City, and we want to build good quality projects that are a benefit to the citizens in the community. So I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have about the project.
So you said UDOT has the L-shaped. How far east on Parish Lane does there, because they purchased the right-of-way with that land or with the whole area that you're developing?
Let's see, I've got a drawing here. Do you want to see
Yeah.
that? So it's kind of a funny piece.
If you could just speak into the microphone, we are recording
It's
this.
kind of a funny piece, but UDOT owns that piece approximately. Looks like that. It's crosshatched.
So if you could try to describe it verbally for the rest of us, that'd be great.
Yeah, it's kind of an L shape. Is that how you would describe it? It's kind of an L shape in the west
side.
And it runs from 1250 west all the way west till about 2/3 of the way down the property. And then the last west area, they don't own. So do they have the right-of-way for just their property that they're selling to you, and they're not selling you that right-of-way? Or do they have they purchased that whole from 1250 to this west area of the property?
They own a no-access line.
I know, that's what
Yeah.
how long?
The
If you
whole
look in
frontage.
your packet, page 4 of the submittal, they show that easement in favor of UDOT and how far up it comes towards 1250, which it appears you're probably not going to get an access that close to 1250 west right-of-way anyway. So
Page
there
4.
is a...
I'm sorry, I can't find it.
So I'm looking at the Legacy Commons PDO submittal attachment,
Oh,
page
4.
4.
Okay, great.
And then you'll have to zoom in, but it does have an easement shown on there. I can't tell, there's 2 lots represented here, but the lines are not, it's too hard to tell what lot is which, but
Yeah, so
lot
if-
2 looks like it's just a square in the,
Yeah, so if you
corner.
look at the plat,
Yeah,
their
there.
easement is located on this end, so it runs all the way up and then dives to the south just before it hits the corner.
Okay. All right, yeah, and I was just,
So they have the
so
whole.
there's no way around
and can you
that.
show us on that map which piece UDOT still owns?
Not on this piece because they're showing the
looks-
subdivision.
It looks like it
Oh, that's
goes-
the proposed
This
new
is the proposed.
subdivision.
That's
Yeah.
correct. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And UDOT would own all the way from 1250, kind of going down to halfway through
Yeah.
part 2. And then back. Okay, I was just asking in case there was some way, I know you've probably thought of it and talked with them, but I was just trying to see if there was any other way to get access there. but.
I think they would love access, and I certainly went with the intention to try to argue for it from behalf and the benefit of the city, because from my perspective, it didn't meet their definitions. So I even talked about the appeal process and the variance process with them, and that was a lengthy discussion. You know, I'm small fry. You know, I walk in as a planner to UDOT, I'm pretty small. And, you know, they were gracious to me and easy to talk to. That's not a problem with UDOT, but the director of Region 1 said, I will not be selling that access. So you'll have to go to the headquarters of UDOT and work those channels.
Well, we're early in the process, right, Spencer?
That's right, yeah, we're not giving up yet.
So tell us a little bit about the hotel.
The hotel is a group, a local group here out of Utah. They own other hotels, and they like this site. They've been under contract for a while now. In fact, they hope to have closed a couple of months ago, but they're obviously just waiting for us to get everything finalized with the city so that we can close. So they're excited. It's a 4-story hotel, about 100 rooms, and it's a new concept, and I think it looks really good, and I think it would be a great thing for the city. You know, it's not a Four Seasons or a Ritz-Carlton or anything like that, but it's a good-looking hotel, and I think it would be a benefit to the community.
Are they planning for conference space and training rooms and those types of things, or do you know at this point?
I don't believe so. I don't believe they have conference space or training rooms, but I'm not positive, and I'm sure that could be built in and incorporated into the project. I've just seen a prototypical
I was just curious.
drawing, yeah.
Other questions for the applicant?
So on the pictures that you sent, what color palette? Because one's very muted, just very tan, and then one is more sort of a brighter red, and then the first one is actually most preferable to me, but do you know what color palette you're leaning towards?
It's on Novus.
Yeah, and there's more on here too.
All of them, I thought.
All of them?
You had a range, to allow a range of colors.
You're referring to those colors that
No,
are shown
I'm not.
on
I
there?
love
You're referring
that.
to the previous drawing that had the
Yeah.
red in it?
Yeah.
So that's a good question. So this original project, this is a project in Colorado that we really liked, and we've based this design off of those units. These have tuck-under garages. And the building that's in Colorado, this project, does have the red color.
So that was just based on that, and this is what you want to do.
Yeah, but we're open, we're flexible. If you like more color.
I like that better. The red, I was a little bit nervous that it was
Yeah.
going to start looking like those Farmington ones
Yeah.
that are like multicolored,
Yes.
and it
Yeah, too
doesn't really
much.
fit, especially with Parish Lane design guidelines. In my view,
I agree.
it doesn't really fit. But I really like that first one, and even the first one with a little bit of like a muted red, I felt like looked
Okay.
good too. But just the brighter red or just the plain brown, both did not look appealing to me.
Okay, no, that's
I-
fair.
that's
Yeah,
just
and
me.
we're flexible on that. Whatever the city would like to see there, we're happy to.
It seems to be more closely aligned with the shorelines.
Yeah. I agree.
I was just delighted not to see the yellow. For the record.
I agree with you there.
Other questions for the applicant?
Y'all know how much I
Thank
love yellow.
Thank you, Spencer.
Thank you.
This matter's been scheduled
The
for
right
public hearing. Anyone wishing to come forward at this time to speak on this matter may come forward at this time. Seeing no one coming forward, I'll close the public hearing. Further discussion or debate?
I like this use.
I
I'm
do too.
excited about this use.
I am
I think
too.
that it's a great use of the space. I was excited the first time that they brought it to us, and I'm still delighted to see that this is the direction that they're going.
I'm gonna kind of miss the concrete myself, but. the
I'm
dump yard.
delighted as well. I wish there were some way, and I know this is not necessarily this development, but I know that having access to Legacy Trail at Parish Lane would be a huge benefit, because we have that huge pedestrian walkway that we just went through, and yet there's no way for someone to just directly get from Parish to the trail system. And being someone that uses it a lot, and I know a lot of people that use it who have come to me at planning commission, knowing that I'm on the planning commission, when are we going to get an access there? And I kept thinking that when something develops, there will be some sort of way to
Now,
encourage that.
the city sold the right-of-way there, so you see the guardrail that's across, and you watch bikers, they drive down, go across, pick up the bike and throw it over. I can see that almost every morning. But UDOT purchased that and closed that off, and there's no intention of reopening that back up. They have a 2-to-1 crossing and all of their arrangements, and they provided that up at $12.75, so that's their position. There is a long story to the sale of that access and the city selling that right to UDOT. I don't think the story completed itself. The city at one point in time was trying to preserve an opportunity at some point to return the $12.75 back, but UDOT's intention is it's closed. They want nobody crossing that ramp area.
Further discussion? If not, the chair will entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion for the Planning Commission to recommend approval for the PDO rezone and conceptual plan for the Legacy Commons as follows, A through F. Is that all of them?
Yeah.
Did I get that? With the suggested reasons for action. Looks like it's B through I.
It kept messing up the bullets. Every time I corrected the bullets, it kept changing them.
It's all good. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't missing one.
Actually, there are lots.
B, C, D, I.
Oh yeah,
E,
there's
F,
a few.
G,
I think that
H,
those are
I.
supposed to be.
As it is in staff report.
As it is in staff report, because I
September
changed it and reloaded it, and I changed it again and reloaded it, and it kept corrupting the file.
As it is.
I will second the motion.
Moved and seconded. Further debate? Hearing none, we'll go ahead and start with Commissioner Hayman.
Aye.
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 Aye. Motion passes. Thank you very much. The next matter for consideration tonight is item number 4, which is also scheduled to be a public hearing, a zone text amendment for residential medium zones, consideration of a proposed zoning text amendment for residential medium zones and their associated provisions. Staff.
Mr. Chair, thank you. This is a carryover from your tabling at the last meeting. Cassie discussed with me a lot of issues that are centered around some of the comments the Planning Commission made about the issue of RL being 4 units an acre and RM permitted use at 4 units an acre, and how that could be confusing to someone. You know, why do we just have an RM that's 4 units an acre instead of an RM-4 units an acre, and then just RM6, RM8? And so the method to my madness here is the construct of our general plan. Our general plan lists RL with a cap at 4 units an acre, medium density that's 4 to 8, and high density that's 8 to 12. And then all of them are built off that, so I know you're aware of that. The issue of why we're not just saying RM and then RM6 and RM8 and the 4 units an acre and so forth is constructed because in our general plan neighborhoods, they don't list different. It's just, here's an area of RL, here's an area of RM, and very little areas of RH. And so the issue that I'm struggling when we go back into a zoning ordinance and implement the general plan is if you construct the RM zoning simply to leave something RM, and then by ordinance we're saying you have to comply with the general plan, then every rezone would be limited only to RM. So it doesn't matter whether you pass a 6 or whether you pass an 8. The general plan says RM, and the category of RM is 4. So I created that RM is the global architecture of the multifamily zones, and the RM4 is the lower base, the RM6 the medium, and the RM8. So that's the method of why we're calling out a 4, even though the 4 matches an RL zone, is because I didn't want the general plan to be interpreted that this area is slated for RM, and then somebody coming back and saying, oh, I know you want RM6, but it only says RM, so you're only getting 4. So that's why we called RM general, RM4, RM6, RM8. The other issue I think came up is why, when a single family is really 5th acre lots, or even potentially almost 6 of an acre lots, 6 units per acre. I agree that we could probably relook at the RL zone, and in relooking at the RL zone, we have to decide the difference between single family at 5 units an acre versus multifamily that's only at 4 units an acre. And I think we would have to readjust accordingly if there's appetite in the city to change the RL from 4 units an acre. That wasn't asked. That's not the specific directive, so we didn't address it. I'm not saying we shouldn't discuss it in the future, but I would hate to send up where we're asked to do a specific directive on the RM and start meddling into the RL, and should it be RL be adjusted accordingly. So I acknowledge there's some weaknesses in the overlap, because RL probably should also be looked at some point in the future to reflect a lot of the historic single-family density. But given that there's that conflict, the RM4 still has a component that I'm trying to set up in my method of my madness in the future. There are places where 8 units an acre would work really well at multifamily. And to rezone that to 8 might be compatible. But if you take similar to, not exactly, it's similar to Balling when they came in and rezoned for that, the argument is should we, I know you only want to do 6, but RM has 8, so I can't rezone you. You know, those kind of arguments go on because there's no tool to prohibit and cap it. What I see in the future with infill, and we've not been back to the infill for, I know, it's probably 8 years ago that we addressed the infill brief with you. The concept that I think is multifamily can work where you, in a predominantly single-family zone, you have a cross place where you have an arterial street with a collector street, or an arterial street with a local street. And particularly on Main Street, you're saying in an RL area along Main Street, we want a single-family home on that corner, and that corner itself is problematic with the traffic, and it changes the value. So we're not using it now, and I'm not trying to say we have to use it, but I am trying to set up the ordinance construction to say at some point in time when we address infill, and infill can be tolerated at a level, 4 units an acre single family, 4 units an acre multifamily, they're just the format of the dwelling units. And so interior to a neighborhood, it's 4 units an acre single family. But on the collector in the corner and the arterials, it's 4 units an acre still, but now you can build a triplex based on your property size, which a triplex would be an infill and a better use on an arterial/corner local street. And so I still think the 4 has some value to match to the single family and be used later, the 4 be used later to go back into the community plans and find out where infill is, and rather rezone it RM that can have up to 8 units an acre, we can rezone it to RM4 that matches the single family density, but the format of density looks different. So that's the method to the madness.
Thank you, Corey. Questions for staff?
Corey,
Go ahead.
I appreciate the work you've done on this. I know that this has been from a directive from the city council, and that has come specifically from public concern with density, as you've mentioned before. So I think it's important to listen to the public concern, and I think it's very important to listen to what the city council is asking you to do. However, I really feel uncomfortable with the idea of 4 units an acre being termed medium density. I just feel absolutely uncomfortable. I know that there may be people that think that medium density is 4 units an acre, but that is not, just because we change the definition of something does not make it so. Everywhere in the country, 4 units an acre, everywhere is considered residential low. And if we're concerned about density, well, then let's zone the areas that we want in residential low. If we want 4 units an acre, don't call it medium density 4 units an acre, because it's not medium density, it's low density, or low zoning, residential low, sorry. So if we're concerned about the density of residential neighborhoods, I would feel more comfortable maintaining that 4 standard as it is across the board everywhere else, and just saying, okay, we need to look at certain areas that we're uncomfortable with higher density and maybe rezone those to residential low or whatever it is. I do think the gradation is important. I also feel like we've been hearing, especially in the Balling property, residential, the 8 units per acre, everyone kept saying, oh, that's high density, high density, high density. We know it's not high density, right? But if that's where we're feeling that push, people keep saying, okay, well, we're comfortable with 6, and maybe we could go up to 7, then let's take it to residential medium 5 and residential medium 7, and that gives us that gradation that still leaves the residential low intact, and it addresses the concerns that people are having with that residential medium 8 units.
I don't disagree with your logic and your thinking. The issue is you have to, from my perspective, understand the community's attitudes and toleration levels. And I don't think you can bite off all of the elephant at this time. And so my issue is to solve the direction at the council, and we'll just have to have those discussions about density. Because from my perspective, 12 units an acre is not high density. But that's not Centerville City's perspective. And so I've got to deal with the perspective where the public mental map of their community exists, regardless of the planning principles that sit.
Well, and I think that's important for you to do, and I appreciate that, actually, and I agree that you do need to take that temperature. But what I'm asking is, if we go residential medium 4, if we're calling that medium intensity, then
right. But
how many people, how everywhere that I can think of right now, almost like the vast majority of the residential low neighborhoods in Centerville would be considered residential medium. Is that incorrect?
It's incorrect because of the categorization that multifamily begins at a different category. That's where and that's what the general plan is constructed with. Your single family is your 4 units an acre or less. Your multifamily, not single family, your multifamily. So the general plan setup right now is that there is not a residential density at 5 units an acre.
Right.
It's capped at the 4 for single family.
Right.
But you can do 4 units an acre multifamily in a multifamily expected zone.
So what would that look like exactly?
If you had an acre lot of multifamily and it was adjacent, that's what the purpose statements are saying, adjacent to residential, then you could have 4 units an acre, but instead of it being in a single family format, it's now in a townhome format. And townhomes, in general principle, should be prospectively more affordable than the single family standalone product. But it's still 4 units an acre and matches the community's idea that they're not being trounced in by a higher density next to their neighborhood.
Couldn't they just do that? So they wouldn't be able to do that, you're saying, with following the 4 units per acre, they wouldn't be able to create a townhome because it's not detached and it wouldn't be under that?
No, you have to do multifamily if you're RM. Single family is a conditional use. So the idea is you're discouraging. The city's trying to say, in its construct of the ordinance, is trying to say, once we say multifamily, we don't want single family. We want connected units.
Corey, can I make sure that I'm understanding your idea behind the RM4 zone, just to make sure that I'm not missing something? So as I understand it, your purpose in including an RM4 zone is because you are concerned that there are references to residential medium in the general plan, and you don't want by default, by not including an RM4 zone, somebody to come back and then just interpret that everywhere we have residential medium, the default is an R4. Am I tracking
Yes.
you on that?
Correct.
So would one way to address Becky's concern, rather than just leave RM undefined, what if we were to do and make RM definition be essentially your RM8, right? So if I just take and I say RM equals what you've written here for my RM8, that's going to be my default. So the default is not going to be 4, the default is going to be 8, but then keep in your residential medium 6, your RM6 zone, and essentially combine the two. So in my view, then you would keep your RL, you would have essentially 2 versions of your residential medium. You'd have 8 as the default, just RM, and then you would have kind of a medium light, so to speak, right?
Yeah.
The RM6, and then just combine the 2 definitions and allow in that RM6 zone anything from single-family homes up to fourplex format.
You could, but we've now got to go back into the general plan and reconstruct it. And I don't think I want to open up the general plan, general reconstruct for public scrutiny when we can fix the concerns just with the zoning ordinance.
And I'm sorry, we'd have to go back into the general plan.
And redefine
because-
the residential section and what RM means, because right now defined RM is 4 to 8.
I was just looking in the staff report, so it says 5 to 8.
Or
We're
5.
talking about the 12-420-2, which even this is problematic because it says 0 to 4 is low, 5 to 8 is medium, and 9 to 12 is high. Well, what about 4.5 or what?
Right, and when you go back into the zoning ordinance, 4 units is the permitted, 8 units is the conditional. So we have to go in and reconstruct the language to the extent where I think the council is just saying, give me tools of the RM zone. And what you're saying is in those tools, I'm uncomfortable, which you can be, so we can table, but now we've got to go back up and start opening up the general plan for public debate. And I know what's going to come to you when you open up that debate. And you're reconstructing the residential densities in the general plan, and that will be perceived as a threat.
I guess I'm just not 100% tracking then why you can create the RM4 zone and not create any problems with the general plan, but doing it the way that I've proposed will create problems with the general plan.
Because now you're
That's the
saying
disconnect.
RM is 8, and then there's these lights
Up to-
underneath.
Isn't RM already 8?
5 to 8.
5 to 8.
Right. I was wanting to do something like that too. I was thinking an RM5, and then to address concerns, what I thought would be just to go up to 7, but then that would totally change the whole
Yeah,
RM.
that's-
Which I'm
that-
fine with going to, still keeping it at 8, but I've heard from residents that, you know, residential 8 is high density, high density, high density, and I'm,
But residential 7 is high density. Residential 6 is going to be high density. It doesn't matter what you cap it at. I mean, the further discussion that Cassie and I have talked about and the reason the purpose statements are very important in the construction of the language is if I just create a general 4, 6, and 8 categories, guess what's going to be the default category on every rezone? Just go to the public. What's going to be the default category on every RM zone?
4,
Right.
which is why I don't want to put 4 even in.
Well, what if you just had an
Medium.
RM6 and an RM8, which would be consistent with your general plan because the RM6 would be 5 or 6 units?
But then what do you do with the permitted uses of the RM zone in the zoning ordinance that says 4 is permitted?
Well, and that's where, you know, there's
That's
this
where I
gap
feel
in the general plan
uncomfortable.
anyway, because it doesn't address between
Yeah.
4 units and 5 units. But you could say the RM6 is anywhere from 4 to 6 units per acre, 4 units being permitted.
Right. Conditional to 6.
5 and 6 conditional? I don't, again, it's.
Yeah, again,
a
you're
little-
changing it because the 4 is the permitted. Anything above that's the conditional.
Can you read us
And so you
the,
can go back and it's going to be the default of the 4 every time.
can you read us what you were mentioning that it says?
Well, I'm just reading out of this, the staff report that's attached to Novus. It is
12-420.
the previous staff report, and it's on page 2. Just the 12-420-2 of the general plan. It says the following policies are adopted specifically for the achievement of the citizens' desires for residential development in Centerville. The density classifications for Centerville's residential areas shall be as follows. And then it has a column describing the dwelling units per acre and then the classification.
Yeah, but
0 to 4 is
Which
low.
is what I was understanding, so that's why I'm confused.
But
as
you're missing,
how
you're missing this,
4
you're missing this point here. The zoning code for your RM zones, your zoning code densities, 4 units per acre permitted. It's not a 5. And 8 units an acre conditional.
Yeah, but we're amending that.
No, we're not amending that section. We're still leaving 4 units an acre in the code. And that's the RM4. And then I'm amending the range up above out of the general plan to have a 6 and an 8. I'm not changing this 4. If you want to change the 4 and just limit it at 5 and do an R5, R6, and R8, but it doesn't make sense. The issue that and Lisa's hinted this in the past, we're having a hard time applying and parsing out all of these quivers. And if you say RM5, RM6, or if you say RM5, RM7, and leave out 8.
I think that's ridiculous to go 5, 6. I mean, that's silly.
Yeah, and that's what I'm trying to, so I'm trying to just let's stay with the framework that the council's comfortable with. And let's give them the tools in the quiver and not get RM roped into the default. Give them the purpose statements so that 4 is when it's used it this way, 6 is when you use it this way, 8 is when you use it that way. And it's easier for them to understand and implement if they can buy off on the purpose statements, because I don't want the 4 to be the default every time a rezone comes in.
Neither do I, which is why this is a problem for me. And I was unaware that the zoning code has that language that says 4 units per acre, because I was more comfortable and more aware of what is in the staff report, and in my mind I've always just believed that 0 to 4 is low, 5 to 8 is medium, 9 to 12 is high, and so I apologize that I was unaware of that part in the zoning code, but I feel very uncomfortable with that as it is. I feel very uncomfortable, and I don't feel comfortable at all in any form labeling medium density at 4 units an acre.
But I understand that, but I feel comfortable because it's an infill tool that can be applied in other residential areas in the future. So I want to keep that quiver or keep that arrow in the quiver.
The main distinction being that the RL is single-family residences, the RM4 is multifamily.
But at a density consistent with the neighborhood.
Density.
Right. But if you don't want that tool in the quiver, we can get rid of it, but I just think it's important.
Let me ask you, from the standpoint of a developer walking in and saying, got this nice corner lot on an arterial street, it's an acre, want to put a 4-plex on here, or no, I want to put a 6-plex on here. Is that acre zoned RM6?
Yeah.
It's already zoned RM6
We're
because
gonna,
it meets the criteria.
Yeah, these will be new.
We're going to change the zoning maps.
Yeah, we're going to change the zoning maps.
RM6, RM8, and there's no discussion.
Yeah, that's the idea, is you'll evolve that zoning code to that level. Today, it's not there, so there'll be an RM zone applied, but they'll go back to when the application for rezone comes in, they're going to look at the purpose statements to guide them on which version of the RM will be applied on a request. Later, we can go back into the neighborhood plans, fix the RM, and decide where the 4, 6, and 8s go, and then holistically rezone all of that. But that's a big task.
Yeah, that's a big task, but I'm wondering if it isn't a necessary one, because I'm concerned that if you're a developer, you come in with an application for a 6-plex on a piece of property that would qualify for RM6. And it's just zoned RM. Then you talk to staff and they say, well, 6 is an approved use because it meets the qualifications. How's a developer to know that unless they ask? And maybe I just answered my own question.
Yeah.
Obviously, the developer's gonna ask for as much density as they can get, and you have to.
Because
bring them off.
they'll see that they're RM on the map, and they're gonna go to the ordinance, and they're gonna look at where the RM is, and those purpose statements start telling them what kind of RM would they potentially qualify for if they want to do it.
Isn't that ju-
I
it's
was
hard.
thinking we were
We had
actually going to
this comment
zone.
last week, though, that, isn't that just sort of a backdoor approach to a conditional use?
Yes, it's getting rid of the ranges, absolutely.
But don't you think,
And
like,
just applying a straightforward, here's your density.
a developer could put in a fourplex on a 6 per acre consistent? So I'm trying to figure out when we need that.
Well, think of it
for
now. Your zone, you
townhouse
have on the map your RM. Permitted for 8 conditional. What can I get?
You're gonna get 8.
Unless
Well, you
there's-
get 4 permitted, that's guaranteed. I'm
Right.
preserving the permitted use right with this.
But you're gonna get 8 unless there's a reason not to give it.
Right. And that's what the problem is. And so we're trying to, the council said, go in and say, fix that problem that when somebody wants more than 4, and I don't think it's eligible for 8, give me another quiver, give me another arrow in the quiver to work with. And I'm saying to parse it out to, because they said, give me RM 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And I couldn't come to that kind of dispersed. But I could come to that 4 is used when you're in a single-family neighborhood and close thereto under these conditions. 6 is when you're in a moderate area under these conditions on the arterial. And 8 is when you're adjacent to a very high commercial or you're using you as a buffer. I could get to that point. But if truth be told for all of us, parsing it out to this level is risky anyway.
Why?
Because they have to interpret the purpose and decide which one do you meet. Right now, we're just saying, you get 8 because we can't mitigate the impact. Now we can say you get 6 because you're on this road adjacent to these uses.
Corey, I appreciate that you want to give us another quiver, as you've described it, but
I didn't ask for it, the council asked
no,
for it.
I understand. I certainly understand where they're coming from, because this has been something that we've all struggled with. But I am equally concerned as Commissioner Wright. I think that there is a misconception about what constitutes low and what constitutes medium density. And I am concerned that if we adopt this as you've drafted it, that now the next time something comes up, people are standing up screaming that that medium zoning is 4, right? And I am concerned about that. And you mentioned at the beginning of your staff report that we may need to look back at the residential low and look at whether we need to address the historic single-family density. And I wonder if the better place to put that additional quiver that you're looking at is in the residential low section, right? So you would have a residential low at an R4 or an
Yeah, but that doesn't fix your
L.
rezonings request for the council right now. It
But
fixes
then
your
we could
broad.
change it to the 6 and the 8.
It would give the council the ability to 6 and 8, that medium zone. And then if what we're really
But they want to
looking at-
preserve the 4.
Well, but the preserving of the 4 would be in the low.
No, because you can't do multifamily. Can't do multifamily in an RL. Cannot do multifamily in an RL at any time.
Yeah, and I think the danger there is if you mess with the RL and you expand it into multifamily, that creates problems in the in the single-family areas where you have an acre of property right in the middle of single family, and
Right.
somebody wants to come in and put a fourplex in.
Can you
Right.
give me an example of where in the city we have a fourplex where someone has an acre and they put a fourplex on it?
We don't. It's being saved and preserved for the infill capacity in the future that we need to address.
But why wouldn't someone just put 4 houses on an acre?
They could, if it's RL. But if it's RM, they get 8.
So why don't we just zone it RM?
It is already
or
zoned
RL,
RM.
depending on what we want. I'm just really confused as when a developer is going to come and say, I see a full acre and I want to put a fourplex on this instead of, I see a full acre and I can.
But you got to, but it's not just in a random acre. It's got to be an acre in an RM zone, according to the general plan.
So can we rezone that area?
Well, that was my concern when we just mentioned that we might leave on our map, our zoning map, RM. I think we actually have to rezone and say, you're either now RM4, RM6, or RM8, because somebody, I mean, I understand areas that are not zoned RM, but I think we're gonna have to decide with the existing RM, which category they fit in.
Eventually, we have to parse that out.
Okay, okay.
But you're in the same position right now with your CUP. I think what you're doing is you're trying to perfect the ordinance in your discussions, and I appreciate that. But you're in the same position right now. I am RM, and I come in and I ask for what? Every time. And can you
parse
mitigate?
it out.
Can you
Let's parse
mitigate?
it out. I'm happy with parsing it out.
And that's what this does.
I am not happy with 4 units parsed to medium. I can't support that. I just
But it's a great infill tool. It's a great infill tool.
I agree with Corey. I think you have to have that flexibility for infill, if it meets the other criteria.
I think, I honestly, and I hate to use such strong language, but I feel like it is playing to fears in the city, and it is redefining what is not accurate. I feel like it's not accurate to what is true.
I appreciate that, because this is the ongoing battle about density. So don't take that I am opposite of you. What I'm trying to give you is the wisdom. I've been around for a long time. And when you push yourself to the idealism, you lose the fights. Take the Main Street plan. So you have to learn where the battle lines should be drawn, and don't try to win the war right away. Don't win the density war in one fell swoop. You'll fail at the council level. So don't win the war. Find the opportunities to meet them somewhere halfway and give them something that they can tolerate, to give them parameters and the restrictions they are, and then the next go around, we add a little bit more, and we add a little bit more. So I can come back in right now, we can go in and notice the general plan, we can fix the RLs, we can change to what real densities and low and high and medium should be, and we will fail, guaranteed.
Becky, if it's any consolation as well, I often look at properties and cities and codes and maps, and terms like medium, high, and low are to a large extent, we just disregard that, because some cities have played this game and are dancing around. So it just boils down to, you just look at the number, you just go figure out your number, and as Corey said, usually you come in at 8 if you can. But I agree, and it's confusing, and it's frustrating, and it's weird, and it's silly that people get so stuck up on what's medium and low and high, and I wish it was more consistent. But anyway, that's just a thought I had.
But this is a dumb idea, because I get the tool, right? I do. I get the tool. I get the difference between a residential low is going to be single-family homes. An RM4 is maybe single-family homes, but it allows for the flexibility to put in the duplexes and the twin homes, and, well, I guess it's just twin homes. Well, I guess that's a duplex. Okay, so fine. I'm with you on that. What if we were to call it an RLM for a zone? I mean, could we do that to really reflect that it's a residential low-end medium density 4? I mean, maybe that's just
could you? The answer
dumb word,
simplistically is yes.
a word play, but I think
But I think you play now in the politics of the citizens.
So I think that even makes it.
You think it makes it more confusing?
Yeah, because I think he's actually done a pretty good job of saying RL is single-family homes, RM is, multifamily homes. I think that's a good division. I know what you're saying about saying it's a lower medium, but I think it just very simplistically makes sense that RM is multifamily, according to the numbers, RL is low, is single family.
I think I'm persuaded. I would very much like for us, though, to relook, whether the council asks us to or whether we take it upon ourselves, to relook at the residential low, because I think that there are a lot of areas in our city where a residential low above 4 unit per acre would certainly be appropriate and welcome in our community. And I think
Agree.
that it would.
I think you could adjust the RLs at some future time, see how that public response is, and that may lead to readjusting the RM in the future too.
I guess my biggest concern is not being definite going forward. And and maybe we don't need to decide this tonight. Maybe pushing this up to the council and letting them weigh in on this, the way it's drafted makes some sense. But from a developer standpoint, it's very difficult to go in to an area that's zoned RM without having some knowledge of what that really means and some understanding. And I'd rather go in with a zoning map that says RM4 or RM6 or RM8. It creates enough definition that you know what you're getting into.
Well, and I agree. That's a future step to be recommended. I mean, you first have to have the tools, and then you go in and implement those tools. And I don't disagree that at some point in time we need to go back into our neighborhood plans, identify where the RM zones are located, and make an assignment in those general plans those expected future land uses.
How many of those are there realistically?
Well, you have 3 neighborhoods that have RM zoning.
Okay, so we're not talking 60% of the city here.
No.
We're talking some relatively small areas.
Yeah, but you have heavy southeast, southwest, and I anticipate those will be very emotional meetings.
Yeah.
Because the first place they're going to want to be when we open up those neighborhood plans is 4.
Well, if we send this up with a recommendation for approval of what you proposed here, I would add a statement to the effect that the process for rezoning specific RM zones begin immediately.
Yep, I think that's fair.
Well, yeah, I mean, my suggestion is we probably have a delayed date, because you can't have a zone on your map that you no longer have in your code. Because if I own a lot in an RM zone and I want to build a house, it's just as problematic for staff to say, oh, well, now what is that? Is that is it RM4, is it RM6, is it RM8?
You mean
Obviously, they'd still have to get a CUP,
right.
But I think from a legal standpoint,
but
the RM on the
But
map.
if you read it correctly, not saying insult, sorry, that came across wrong. If you read it correctly, we're doing the exact same thing. 4 is permitted across the board. RM4 is your RM zoning. It's across the board.
Right, but
6 and 8 remain conditional. So if somebody comes in, right now, they're 4 units an acre permitted, up to 8 units an acre conditional. That's the current status quo. We're not changing that. You come in tomorrow with these tools, you're 4 units an acre, 6 conditional, 8. So it's the 6 and the 8. And if you go back to the purpose statements, that defines in the conditional use process whether you're 6 or whether you're an 8.
Is there really any harm, though, in doing what Lisa has proposed, if what I understand is right, is to say, look, if this is what we all agree on, that's great, but we're going to wait to implement this until we've done part 2 so that we can put both the new definitions and the map, promulgate them at the same time?
Yeah, but now you're talking about months.
Is that such a bad thing?
I think it's a safer bet.
And I don't mean years, I mean you're looking at several months, because we got to go back in, renotice those plans, host those hearings, and analyze, make those recommendations, have those debates, and it's going to be each individual area, and you're going to have 10 of them in one neighborhood plan, and everybody's got to be noticed with that.
I'm not
and have
actually
those long
proposing
hearings.
general plan amendments, because I think we had this discussion at the last meeting.
Right.
My opinion is, in the general plan, you say this area is appropriate for residential medium development. And it's at the zoning level with our zoning code that we're saying 4, 6, or 8.
Right. and
So
you
I'm
still-
not,
But you still have to do the same process. You have to notice the area, all the people that are
oh, right, yeah, and
into
you have to
it,
provide individualized
and you're going to
notice.
have lengthy meetings to implement it. And I think at this point in time, to be honest with you, I think that you should send that up with that. I don't disagree with that. But I think the council's not under the appetite to go in and host and stir that kind of hornet's nest.
Well,
They just want a tool for now to work with their densities, because everything that comes to them is a request of an 8, and they want some other tools. Whether it's a perfect tool, it's not. But it gives them something that's no different than your 4 and up to 8. It's conditional once you get to those 2 areas. And here's how you get the 6, and here's how you get the 8.
I just think it's safer territory to, from a planning standpoint, to send it up with that recommendation. If the city says no, we like, you know, the arrows that we've got, and we're gonna go with that, then we'll see how it works out.
Right.
But I bet you we're back here talking about getting specific sections rezoned.
I guess that's why the city council is the ones that make the big bucks, right? I would be inclined to defer to whatever Lisa's advice on this one would be, but I agree with you, Chair Hershey. Let's go ahead and send it up, in my opinion. See what they say.
Well, before we do that, this matter's been scheduled for a public hearing, and there may be some people who'd like to talk about this. So if any of you would like to come forward at this time, please do.
Hello, I'm James Graham. I'm the applicant here with Dave Bell. But yeah, the property is 644 West Porter Lane that's, I'm referring to. But, I just want to express that, City Council wanted us to move quickly through this, and, we're burning time and all that. So I'm really hoping that we can kind of move it forward. I understand there's a lot of complicated stuff you guys are dealing with. And Cassie and Corey have been working really hard over there for us and for everybody in the city. But, R4, you guys obviously are figuring that out. It's pretty complicated. I don't think I can help you there. But R6 to me, if I was to look at high and low density, whatever you want to call it, to me that would be a property surrounded by either RM all around it, or 25% of it is RL around it. An R8 to me, maybe something that's 50% surrounded by either, or 100% really, either surrounded by commercial, an RH property all around it, or at least 50% RM around it. So I don't know, I just think that there's ways that you could probably write it up that I've worked with other cities where they've kind of had percentages and lengths of things to count it in order to distinguish whether it fit R6, R7, R8, or whatever you want to call it. But as far as that goes, I hope you guys push it forward and let's make this happen.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm Dave Bell. First off, Corey, you're not small fry. You're a big guy. Second thing, I'm probably gonna. This is
Dave, I have lost 10 pounds.
No, I meant that in a nice way. This is the flat Earth argument here. Now, I know all your eyes are rolling. You're like, what is he talking about? But I totally agree with you guys. It's like you're afraid of the Inquisition. The church is going to come in here with their pitchfork. Everybody's going to say the Earth is round. We know it's round. But just because it says in the thing that it's flat, are we doing our job as public servants to just kind of close our eyes and say, okay, it's flat because we're afraid of the fanatics that are convinced that the Earth is flat when it's not. We know it's not. So this thing with the this R4 low, R4 medium, that should be fixed. The Earth is round. I hope I'm making sense. because you guys are really smart. I've been impressed. I haven't been in front of the planning and zoning for a long time. I'm the guy with the palm trees, by the way. So I've been in this city for a long dang time. Lisa, if I get really stupid here, will you smack me, kick me? Okay. So I hope I'm the one that caused this mess, because I own some land still around my place there on the frontage road. There's 2 acres behind the shop, and it's kind of it's an eyesore now, because Brighton Homes put in that nice development, and you know, my boys, I got 2 of them, had 5 kids. 2 of them I tried to chase away from and they just kept coming back, so they're working there now, and I've got grandkids and all that. And I thought that the business would grow, and you know, I'd have like, my gosh, more cars than I have now. And I thought, I'll need that ground. Well, there's not enough houses around here. You know, it's not going to be a Larry Miller dealership or anything like that, because it's, you know, we're just kind of this thin little corridor here. And people aren't going to drive more than, you know, 10 miles to get there. They love me, but they don't love me that much. So that's not going to happen. So now I got this property, and I wanted to go R high, of course, because I'm like, you know, I'm the developer now. He's the developer. I'm the guy that owns the property. But you know, I'm thinking it's next to commercial high, everything Les Schwab, Land Rover, Cherie's place, Ken Garf owns that and everything. And then my place. That's all commercial high. And then you gave 8 units an acre, right, to Brighton Homes. And we got, you know, and you guys are so young. I mean, I can remember, you know, people. I mean, oh my gosh, I've been out there for almost 30 years. You know, it's unreal how long I've been fixing cars in this city. But I remember when Porter Lane there, where they did what's the development across from Brighton? What do we call that? I should know. Yeah, Shayla Park. I remember, I mean, the people with the pitchforks came in here back like, what was that, 15, 20 years ago? And they were like, and those were the houses that flooded because they were so low. When the creek, back then, the creek always overflowed. I used to take my backhoe and I had to dig that out because it was a mess. And I mean, because I lived in the house right behind my shop. I raised my family there before we moved to Bountiful. I don't know quite a few places behind there, but people come in here with pitchforks about Shayla Park. They thought, I swear, people said this. The neighborhood's going to go to pot. You know, we're going to have more crime. The police aren't going to be handling it. And now Shayla Park is full of old people like myself. You know, they're just retired old people. And that's who's buying these homes. And you said something about, you know, people are expecting on RM4 to pay less than they would on a RL home. Those those Brighton home things, those are $350,000, man. And you can't, those homes like Port Lane First, you know, the chapel there, so I knew all the residents when I was raising my family. Those homes, you can't sell them homes, those single family homes up there. They're not going for $350,000. Those Brighton townhomes are going more than the single family homes just east of 200 West. And so I think you guys are right. I mean, you know, just because we say the earth is flat, don't make it flat. And so if you've got this problem, just because it's, you know, you think R or 4 is medium density, it ain't medium density, and you all know it's not medium density, but yet because we're so scared of the, you know, you're going to have 20 psychos in here. I've heard them. I've sat in the back of the room. It's unreal, you know, but do we not, are we afraid to, like, we could educate them, couldn't we? Now, I know this is probably not helping my cause because, you know, I'd really like to sell the property and I'd like to get it moving and, you know, collect my money and do some other things with it. But I think I really wanted to applaud you, you know, you gals and everybody here. I think you're trying to do the right thing. Corey, I didn't really try to make more work for you, and Lisa, I do not, you know, I know you're probably busy as all, but maybe we should really fix this thing right. I don't need, you know, I could wait you know, I've been sitting on my property for 30 years, man. wouldn't it be the right thing to do this? And if these people come in here, these fanatics, what are we going to do? We're just going to, do we as a public, do we let the people that, thrust their swords in our face, do we kowtow to that and say, okay, I'm sorry. I don't know. I don't think that's the way we want to live. I think we could fix this and educate the people that the earth ain't flat. Did I say everything I wanted? I think so. I really appreciate your time. Thank you for your service.
Anyone else like to speak to this?
Chad Morris, and I declare the earth is round. Round. No, and really, I just want to second what good Dave said. We do have some fanatics, and I may be a fanatic on the other side. Obviously I develop stuff, but dare I say we may have some fanatics. Never mind. But I just feel like
planning staff.
We need to be careful of moving through things too quickly in order to please, maybe the city council or whatnot. I do feel that they represent the loud, and I don't know, maybe you guys have some of the same feelings, and that's okay. But I think we do need to make sure we're not just representing the loud instead of the many, because the loud, from what I have seen, are those who have more time to come to meetings, to come to these things. And there are a lot of people, I'm a real estate agent, there are a lot of people who want to live in Centerville, who grew up in Centerville, but can't afford Centerville. Or there's just not enough homes in Centerville. And so we need to be careful about limiting even more so what we're doing. Zach.
Thank you, Chad. Anyone else? All right, thank you for those comments. We'll close the public hearing.
Mr. Chair, if I can just, I've talked a lot. One closing statement, because I want to be clear of the consequences. I know we're talking about in the future, we've got to go back in and look at where 6s and 8s, and I don't disagree with that. But I think the point, and maybe this is the wrong tool, but I want it to be clear so you understand. The council, under the request of this ordinance, would receive something that's an RM zone request. Then the council would say the RM zone has the tools necessary to implement the RM zone. We grant you the RM zone. They're not granting RM6. They're not granting RM8. You're granting the conditional use of 6 or 8. So I just want that to be clear. So the council right now, with the way this is written, is to implement the conditional use range with those tools so that when a request goes up to them, they're rezoned RM. They're not rezoning a category. So force permitted, once they rezone that property, this body implements the conditional use. So you'll look at the purpose statement. Is it a 6 or is it an 8 conditional use?
Okay, so you're really not creating an RM4 zone. So that's totally
The
new.
4 is permitted to all of it across the board.
Right, but you're not creating a new zone.
No.
What you just said is you just want to keep it RM.
Right.
Okay, well, that's not really, this is creating a new zone.
No,
You're just saying,
it's
so
creating-
you're still keeping RM on the map, but then they come in for a CUP?
That's what it says in the construct. 4 is the permitted density in all zones. 6 and 8 is the conditional use density. Go back to the purpose. The commission then awards a 6 or an 8.
So you'd have to amend this 123110 because that actually creates 3 new zones. I didn't realize that was
Maybe
the
it's not
intent.
constructed perfectly, and I apologize for that, but that's the intent, is
Yeah, 'cause it
that,
says there are 3 distinct RM zones. So if you wanted RM6, you have to be zoned RM6, which I thought we were keeping the legislative decision with the council to
no,
decide.
this is the commission implementing the CUP. That's the intent of the written.
I don't
And I
think
may have
this
erred
really
in
says
the
that.
in the construct. Well, just go to the body.
Well, there are 3 distinct RM
Yeah,
zones
but
within the
let's just
city.
go simple table. That'll help, the tempo. RM, 4 units an acre for all RM zones, RM 6 units, RM 8.
Right, but I'm just
8.
saying that table's not consistent with the
Yeah,
actual
and then
language.
I apologize if the crafting's not perfect. I'm just trying to get somewhere in the format. But this is not having the council at this time implement a 6 or an 8. It's the conditional use is the 6 or an 8, and that's applied by the planning commission during the conditional use process using the purpose statements. If we want to go back in later and start amending neighborhood plans and assigning zoning categories, we can, but that's what I'm trying to stay away from because it's not an efficient process at this point in time. We're just implementing the conditional use at your level. And they're either going to get a 6 or they're going to get an 8. They're not going to get a 7, they're not going to get a 5. And that's maybe where I've confused you, is trying to craft it.
So the planning staff recommended motion just simply talks about the approval of various RM zone amendments.
Mhm.
The only 2 amendments that you're really proposing here is an approved RM6 and approved RM8.
And adding all your design standards.
Right, right, and adding the criteria.
Yeah.
So, but the criteria is already there for RM4.
Yeah.
So it's only the criteria for RM6 and RM8.
No, the criteria for 4 will apply, the design criteria. Anytime you do multifamily, it'll apply to RH and RM zones.
That's true, yeah, the design criteria.
Design
But not-
criteria.
but not the location criteria.
Not the location criteria. Location criteria is only intended to address the conditional use ranges and allow the commission to implement the density as you see fit on the purpose statements.
Are the architectural design standards that you've included consistent with what we've seen in the past, or?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
It took a lot of what we've seen and some generic stuff we use common throughout other ordinances in the city.
Do you feel like would they inhibit RM development or aid RM development, or are they like?
No, this is the devil in the details position I've taken. Density is irrelevant. Design is more important.
So you feel like they're more strict design than what we have for RM right now?
Yeah, because right now you're using the CUP in its general welfare category to try to get better development. So I apologize. I see maybe finally where you might be confused.
Can you pull up the zoning ordinance that you had? The online thing,
Oh, the,
zoning code. So wait, go up a little bit. What is that? 12 dash?
32-300, Table of Development Standards in Residential Zones.
Yeah. Okay. I know that this hasn't been noticed, but I would like us to consider as a commission if we feel like it's appropriate, and I might be the only one that thinks it's appropriate, but feel if it's appropriate to amend that table so that the RM zone, if you scroll down, gross density permitted does not say 4 units per acre. I feel uncomfortable with that going forward. I've already stated that. And I know that we're going to be having a motion here, and I will unfortunately not be able to support a motion that includes an RM4 based on principle and based on the fact that I believe it's important that we maintain an RL that is true and an RM that is consistent with what is consistent. I'm less concerned about if it says RM5 or RM7 or RM6 or RM8. I am most concerned about that, and concerned that we are muddying the waters of what I think is standard and is appropriate. So that's just my, I don't know if we could make a motion to consider putting that up for public, noticing that for public and continuing that as part of the discussion, or if even anyone would want to do that.
I believe we noticed it, so it was various, so that if any amendments you want to make related to RM are available to you.
So that would be the 20 dash, that table would be allowed?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, should I just?
Do you want to put forward?
It wouldn't address your RL stuff. It would only
Right.
relate to the residential medium.
So can you just go back up to that so I can see the number of that? I hereby make a motion that the Planning Commission to amend 12.32, I can't see that very well.
300.
.300, Table of Development Standards, under the RM, gross density maximum permitted use, right there.
Yep.
Is that correct?
Yeah. Well, it's RL, so we got to go to RM. Permitted is right there.
If you want to look on page 2 of the proposed draft, that chart, the proposed amendments to that chart are right there. So that's what Corey's saying. We've already proposed to amend this provision. So it still has gross density maximum permitted use, 4 units per acre, gross density maximum conditional, RM6.
And I don't like the 4 on the
Right, so
medium.
you could just amend what's being proposed.
Okay.
Would it be more appropriate to make a motion on the overall item and then amend the motion? Maybe not.
I'm trying to figure out the best way to do this, because I think it's related, but I just didn't see the language specifically. So on page 2, I see you're talking about.
So for instance, you changed the 4 to the 5. I think Logan may be right. It's
Yeah,
easier to
I
just
think
do
so,
an
too.
amendment to the motion.
Okay. So you're talking about the staff draft
Yeah, I've
version
got it up on the
3.0.
screen for you.
Okay, perfect. I was looking at the other page.
So you can change that number or get rid of it and replace it with something else.
Okay.
Well, so that we can move the matter forward, and there may be more than one amendment to this, Chair would entertain a motion based on the staff report, and then we can debate it further.
I'll make a motion for the Planning Commission to recommend to the City Council to approve the various RM zone amendments as presented by staff with findings A through C in staff report.
So that's the staff draft September 13th version.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Do I hear a second?
I'll second that motion.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Further debate?
I would like to amend what has been recommended by staff. As was noted in the staff draft version 3.0 on page 2, the table of development standards in residential zones, 12.32.300, the gross density maximum permitted. And I'm open to discussion about this, but I don't feel comfortable with the 4 units, so I would say 5 units per acre for all RM zones.
I'll second.
Been moved and seconded. Debate on the amendment?
I can't believe I'm gonna oppose this, but I just feel like we need that 4 because it gives us the space between 4 and 5.
I
Do you
agree.
feel more comfortable with over 4?
That I could probably definitely live with. Just think, there is that moment where maybe it is a 4.5. I feel like the difference for me, and maybe I'm making this too simplistic, but residential medium is multifamily, residential low is single family. So to me, they're kind of different. Am I making that too simple, Corey?
That's what I tried to say. You just did it in 5 seconds.
So for me, I'm saying, okay, my little math brain says 4 and under is residential low. That's what we're defining, kind of. And 4 and above is, if it's multifamily, then it's 4 and above.
And medium.
That's what it says. And
So I guess I'm okay with the 4, but I would also probably be okay with if you just say above 4.
Which means 5, unless you want to have a half an acre.
I'm a math, I'm an engineer, I do decimals.
Yep.
So
Just remember, we round to the nearest tenth on density.
I'm okay with the nearest 10th.
But it's hard to break a unit. I understand where Commissioner Wright's coming from. I just don't see the logic of taking away that flexibility, especially for infill, because I think it's going to come back to us. And I think we're going to need to have the flexibility to still have the 4. And I think it artificially increases density where it doesn't need to. And I'm kind of a proponent of density, so I don't know why I'm making that argument, but I am. I like flexibility more than I like density.
I think that's why I'm wondering why I'm disagreeing with it, but.
I guess my reasoning for it is that I fail to see the use of including that, and again, I just feel like it muddies the waters, and it really doesn't paint an accurate view of what I think we're trying to say with RL and RM. So that's I know that it's may limit a little bit, but it does to me ring more true. So
This discussion to me underscores why I think it's so important for us to revisit the RL, because an RM is contemplating multifamily housing, and I certainly think that there are areas in our community that would be well served from a residential low, but that would allow more than 4 units per acre of single-family homes. And there very well may be areas that we want to encourage single-family homes above 4 units per acre.
Absolutely, and I think that's where I say I'm okay with, if it's, I agree with Becky. I really don't see, I think most developers are gonna be, if you're doing multifamily, sort of makes sense that it's gonna be more than 4 units per acre.
well, and speaking to what Shaylin just said, I mean, if you're putting a lot of what we're seeing in development right now is they want to get more units, but even over there on Parish or on Pages Lane, they wanted single-family detached homes at 6 units per acre? So they're really trying to do single-family homes, but they're wanting a higher density. So is that considered multifamily? Is that considered residential medium? What are we talking about here? Because if we're talking about residential medium, that to me, the term of that is that multifamily.
That would just be single family set at a density, whatever that density is.
Right, but what would it fall under? It wouldn't fall under RL
Right.
because.
Well, right now it's a gap because single family is capped at 4.
Exactly.
But we
So-
could have single family at 6 and we could have multifamily at 4, and there's nothing wrong with that either.
Further debate on the motion to amend?
RL. Because it was a different zoning back then. I think they had.
Any further debate on the motion to amend? If not, we'll bring it to a vote. Commissioner Logan.
Aye.
Johnson. No.
No.
Aye.
No.
No.
Motion to amend fails. So we're back to the original motion that the matter be sent with recommendation to the City Council as drafted in the staff report. Any further comment or debate? Further amendments?
Yeah, generally, I would just like to state that I feel like this is generally a tool to use to reduce density, and I feel like that's the wrong direction. I feel the city, I don't want to say feel anymore. That is the wrong direction that I think that the city should head. And secondly, it's not a clear-cut item, and I applaud staff's dealing with all the constraints with timing and trying to develop a tool that works. But I'd rather not see it go forward.
Could I ask, Logan, why do you think it's a tool to restrict density?
I think the main purpose of this will be to take an RM. One of the main purposes will to take an RM zone, which currently allows to 8, and to try to make it more likely that gets peeled to 6, or to essentially 6 or 4. And so, because generally I feel like, because generally I am of the opinion that we should move away from lower densities as much as we do in this city. I just would like to limit the city's ability to do that. I would look for ways to encourage stronger property rights and more density.
In contrast, I think based on what we just heard from Lisa and Corey, and a light sort of went on for me during that discussion. I think that since the 6 and 8 units are conditional use, that the determination of that density is going to be with this commission. And if it's set up on specific criteria that we can analyze realistically as a commission, which I think we have a good start here. There may be some tweaks and some modifications that we would like to deal with, but I think that at least we have a standard upon which we can make a decision of something less than 8, but more than 4, and maybe a decision to grant 8 when the appropriate conditions exist. And so I don't see the argument that it's a tool to reduce density. In fact, I think it gives us the flexibility and the ability, really, to create density where it's appropriate.
You know, and not to, I'm glad Kevin isn't here. He'd get really upset if I did this. I can also see scenarios where a rezone comes in, a rezone request from an RL, and if our hands are tied and we say, well, if we can't go any higher, because if we take you to the RM in our current zone, that goes straight to 8. So this gives a tool in some scenarios to actually increase that. And that was the debate in my head, which is going to be more frequent, as I was sitting there wondering, well, what's going to happen more often? And just judging from the sentiments of the temperature of the community, if I'm a betting man, the scenario that reduces density is more frequent. But that is a guess.
Other debate? Let's vote on the motion.
Mr. Judge, just for clarity, I perceive that there are some structural problems with it as far as applying it as administrative reviews. So any motions, if they include an approval, whether the vote goes through or not, is irrelevant, ought to include those structural changes.
I think it could be more clear based on our discussion tonight, and I don't want to change the motion that's been issued, but perhaps just a friendly amendment that any clarifications that arise from our discussions tonight that staff could add to the report before it goes to the commission ought to be included.
Does that require a second, Chair?
It does. It's a friendly amendment.
I'll second it.
Okay. Been moved and seconded. Discussion or debate on that? All in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay. So to the motion.
I'm sorry, do we need to address the residential low ability that Shaylin talks, or not at this point?
I don't think the matters on the has been noticed, but
I would agree with that. I make the comment because I think that it's something that we as a commission, whether we are given the directive to re-examine that from the city council or not. I think that it's something that we should put on our plates for future consideration.
It will appear in the minutes, and if any of you, as you render your votes, would like to make a specific statement as to why you're voting the way you are, that will also be very, very clear to the council as they review the vote on this. So we have a motion and a second with the amendment that staff go through the report and make a few changes that would perhaps better reflect the intent here, especially as it applies to the current zoning and what we're really changing, what we're not changing. Commissioner Hayman.
Aye.
Aye.
Nay, based on what I've already said, so I don't think I need to say it again.
Aye.
Aye.
Nay. Same ditto.
Motion passes. Thank you all. And thank you for your comments tonight as well. Thank you. The next item on the agenda is item number 5. It's a public meeting if anyone wants to stick around. South Main Street Overlay Plan discussion.
Just write my
Okay,
name.
now we don't want to get those bribes on the record.
Yeah, don't put that on the record.
The future of the South Main Street Overlay Zone. Does anybody want to tackle this? If not, I will. Thought a lot about this. At the work session, we talked a lot about whether the overlay zone had outlived its life and whether it has disincentivized development along Main Street. We touched on that tonight a little bit with the catering business. Sad but true, my vision of Disneyland Main Street is no longer with me. And I do believe that the only way we're going to revitalize Main Street is to allow market forces to take effect. And the best thing we could do to encourage that, I think, is to adhere to our public space plan to the extent it's been adopted. Hopefully have an opportunity to improve it as we go forward. But develop some realistic standards and guidelines and encourage businesses along Main Street, both old and new, as they remodel, redevelop, or build, to have some design guidelines that will make our Main Street more beautiful. And I think that's where I'm at on this.
I can let you know just the logistics of it. Staff, as I understood it, was to create a backbone of some design guidelines. I've been underway with that, probably about 2/3 done with that draft. And then I've got to go back in and refine it and capture, make sure it's reflecting things consistently. So that's being prepared, for your November, first meeting in November for the work session prior to your meeting, if I understood. So that's the logistics going forward with meeting with the council.
Any guidance that we can give Corey along those lines, or do you totally disagree with what I just said?
I agree with what Dave said.
Feel free.
Yeah, I like that direction.
I think we need to think about the fact that this is really going to be redevelopment that we're trying to hope for. You know, that was one thing that I think Corey illustrated and discussed that was a big failing of the Main Street plan to put in place, is that all of these form-based codes and all this that we wanted to see happen, or that was implemented before we were here, really works when you have just virgin land and areas. And this is a redevelopment area where we need to make sure that we're considering how we want to see the redevelopment to occur, and aiding in redevelopment, right? So yes, I think it's very vital that we completely implement the public space plan, because we fought hard to get that, and we need to make sure that those elements are all there. I also think we need to talk about design guidelines that are going to help us maintain a good feel and look of our city, because if you're going through Centerville, you're more than likely either on Parish Lane or Main Street. And we have Parish Lane design guidelines, which I think are great, and we have a high quality looking city because of that and the feeling. But also we should have design guidelines along Main Street that allow that same feel when people pass through as well. But those two need to sort of balance, in my opinion, the trying to help redevelopment occur.
Don't disagree with that. So Corey, as you're developing this, I personally would like to see a sneak peek before the next work session. And in fact, I would like to have us put on our planner hats and really help define what we would consider our vision. You may disagree with it. You may propose a couple of different things to the council.
Well, we're down at a blank slate. There's no disagreement.
So I would not like to wait until the first meeting in November to at least have some further discussion about that. What are your thoughts?
I agree.
I don't think it's inappropriate that I could have the draft done for you prior to the work session.
Maybe at our second October
At your,
meeting?
yeah, your second October meeting, and have, again, they're developing in the concepts and trying to place the language behind the concepts, so they won't be perfected in their entirety yet, but it'll certainly give you the backbone and foundation to be thinking.
Yeah. And along those lines, and I agree 100%, this is a redevelopment, and we need to weigh that into this. But there are ways to incentivize redevelopment that we probably haven't even thought about yet. To make the catering folks, if they buy this property, spruce up their place a little bit. I mean, there's some options out there, and I think we can utilize that.
Yeah, I think I could have that backbone and deliver it to you for discussion like you are tonight, with the crafting and drafting of it, and then, later we meet with the council, so that way you can sit back prior to that meeting and contemplate the backbones and what suggestions and ideas that are generated on top of the backbone that's created or altering it. I don't think that'd be a problem at all.
It wouldn't be like we're keeping a secret from the council because they can review the staff.
Oh, they can review the staff report. It's in draft. I think it's a good place. And, my argument is, if anybody's like, what are you doing? I mean, my argument is, you're the citizen planners. You're the ones that are creating and drafting the ordinances. Yeah, the council can give input, but they're not the ones creating and drafting ordinances. It's staff and the commission and the citizen planners, your assignment to craft those ordinances. So, the more you're prepared, the better the document's going to be.
Well, I don't know if we need a motion on this, but do we have consensus from the commission that we would like to see something by the second meeting in October to weigh in on?
Yeah.
And put that on the agenda for that meeting?
I'll
else?
have Cassie look at the comments.
Thank you. Anything else on that item? Okay, we're gonna get to the fun part. Let's review the minutes.
And Chair, since I apologize that I had to leave early at our work session and meeting. And since I was not here, and since it is our last item, I think I'm just going to go. Is that okay?
Unless you'd like to hear all of our great amendments.
I read through the meeting minutes, but I'm not going to have any changes, so.
Okay.
I'm not going to
Logan very jealous because he pushed
I
hard
know.
to have the other meetings.
I get fired for that, so help me, Corey.
Watch us approve these and be on.
Sorry, Logan, I wasn't trying to do that.
So I'm going to be excused if that's all right.
Yeah, let's see. I guess we still got.
Do you still have a quorum?
Yeah. Yes, thank you, Commissioner Wright.
Thank you.
Thank you for your comments.
Yeah, Logan, just have him call me. Tell him that's my tongue-in-cheek joke.
That's all the council does.
Okay, let's move to the minutes of the work session. I will just go through these page by page. Any comments, please speak up. Page 1. Page 2. I was going to originally suggest we take out the Commissioner Wright left the meeting at 5:50, but later on I read her statement, which doesn't make sense if we don't have that in there, so I'm okay with that.
Well, actually, it does indicate
It does at
on the
beginning.
planning commission's present, in parentheses on that
Yeah.
first page, that she was excused at 5:50. I don't know that we necessarily need to emphasize it twice, except it does show exactly, never mind, I take back my comment, because it shows where she left.
Yeah.
So I'm okay.
Anything else on page 2? Page 3, I would like to add the words at the end of line 6, but said he is not sure what the density component would need to be.
So my minutes are not tracking what the ones you're looking at. So if you could just give me the item and.
Okay.
We're on the
It's,
September 13th joint work session minutes,
Oh,
not the other ones.
So Katie Rust, did the work session minutes, so I only
You just brought
have
the commission
the meeting minutes. So
well, it's recording,
It's
so
being
she
recorded,
should be
so
able to pick
we'll
that
get
up.
those to her. Okay, so proceed as you are, thank you.
Okay. I'd like to also add at the end of line 43, the line that begins, want to improve their properties without a lot of restrictions from the city other than consistently applied design standards. I don't know if I said that, that's what I meant. Any issue with either of those changes? Any other changes on page 3? Page 4. This will obviously go to the city council for their input, I presume, after our vote. So Chair will entertain a motion on work session minutes.
I'll move that we approve the work session minutes as amended.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any debate? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. Moving to the Planning Commission minutes for our September 13, 2017 meeting. Any comments on page 1? Page 2? Page 3? Page 4? Page 5. I think we need some words on line 12. Chair Hershey requested information regarding the intended hours of operation. Anything else on page 5? Page 6? Page 7? 8? 9? 10? 11? 12? Just a quick comment, and I think this is right, Shaylin, but on line 20, I think that there were some amendments made to scenario A. And so I think maybe the motion was meant to say, present alternative scenarios A as amended and B to the city council.
You know, I don't remember.
Yes, you changed the park stuff and up to.
That's right, you are
Yeah,
right,
we just
yes.
changed, we just had
Yeah.
some
I
slight
would,
language change,
I would be fine with changing that to as scenarios A as amended.
because it is going up as amended, right?
Yes.
Yes,
That
it
is
went up as
correct.
Any issue with that, Lisa?
Well, I was just thinking, if it's scenario A and B as amended, there was one change that I think was in both.
In both? Well, we could say both,
Yeah.
just to be on the safe side.
So it'd be
A
scenario
as
A and
amended.
B, comma, as amended, comma, to
Yes.
the city council.
Yep.
Anything else on 12? 13? 14? 15? 16? from another meeting on the back. Chair will entertain a motion.
I move that we approve the minutes as amended.
Second.
Any debate? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Very good. Development Director's report.
Just real quick, we do have an item for your next meeting. Which one was it?
A final site plan for Symphony Homes office building.
Which I confused that they were coming for conceptual, so it was an interesting Development Review Committee meeting when the whole group looked at me like, what planet are you on? And I said, I'm 63 miles in the air, in space, so. Didn't put this on your agenda, but the city council did deny the construction sales and service.
Denied what?
Denied the construction sales and services. My reading between the lines is it may come back up after the issues of amending the South Main Street result in something, whatever that something might be.
Yeah, well, yeah, I would say given where we're heading on this,
Yeah.
it makes sense that would.
I think the issue
Maybe
was
the
discussion.
timing was just not right.
Yeah, they just felt like there was no immediacy because the fire department was going to lease back that building until 2019 anyway. So my gut feeling is that discussion may resurrect at some point in time.
Okay. Just out of curiosity, anything at all on pages?
It's crafted for the council meeting next
Coming
week.
Okay.
Next week it's scheduled.
Well, again, thanks, staff. Good job. Appreciate it. Thank you all for rousing and heated discussion tonight. Any objections to adjourning?
Okay, second moved. What?
I just.